Trust is perhaps one of the most powerful illusions we have built throughout our evolution as a species. We think of it as something solid, almost tangible, an invisible bridge between two human beings. But what do we really know about that bridge? Who can we truly trust in this increasingly complex world where human relationships are simultaneously more superficial and more intertwined than ever before? For thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small groups where trust was a matter of immediate survival. You had to know with absolute certainty that the hunter beside you wouldn't abandon you when a predator appeared. This trust was an evolutionary protection mechanism, essential and necessary, but now we live in a radically different world, where threats and alliances take on much subtler and more complex forms. Technology has completely transformed our capacity to trust and to be trustworthy. We no longer trust only people, but systems, algorithms, and entire networks of interconnected humans and machines. Have you ever wondered why we feel that almost painful need to trust someone? That deep sense that we need at least one person in the world who completely understands who we are, who stands by us unconditionally? That desire isn't accidental. It's the echo of our evolution as a social species, when isolation meant certain death. But the world has changed drastically, and our evolutionary instincts are not always aligned with the realities of modern life. Today, trust has become simultaneously more necessary and more dangerous than it has ever been. Let's examine the origins of this contradiction. For most of human history, we lived in groups of 50 to 150 people. We knew every member of our tribe intimately, their facial expressions, habits, strengths, and weaknesses. Trust was based on direct, constant observation, reinforced by blood ties and decades of shared experience. In hunter-gatherer societies, betraying the group's trust often resulted in exile, practically a death sentence. In that context, it was relatively safe to trust your immediate circle. Evolution equipped us with sophisticated neurological mechanisms to detect lies and assess reliability. Our brains have circuits dedicated to recognizing micro-expressions and subtle inconsistencies in others' behavior. But these mechanisms were designed for a world very different from the one we live in today. In the information age, our evolutionary tools for assessing trust face unprecedented challenges. We regularly interact with thousands of people we will never meet in person. We trust companies, governments, and systems made up of millions of anonymous individuals. Our ability to assess who deserves trust is overloaded beyond the limits it was designed for. And so we come to a disturbing conclusion. There are entire categories of people whom our natural tendency is to trust, but who often don't deserve that trust. Not because they're inherently malevolent, but because the incentives, structures, and realities of the modern world create conditions where implicit trust becomes dangerous. Who are these people we shouldn't trust blindly, even when all our instincts and social conditioning tell us otherwise? Before identifying them, it's important to understand that this isn't a call for universal paranoia. I'm not advocating for a world where we suspect every smile, every offer of help, every extended hand. That would be not only psychologically destructive, but also evolutionarily counterproductive. Cooperation based on trust is what allowed us to build civilizations. But we must recognize that our programming to trust doesn't always serve our best interests in the radically transformed environment we've created. The first category of people we must question are those whose incentives are fundamentally misaligned with our interests, even when they are members of our own family. Consider the financial advisor who also happens to be your cousin. He may genuinely care about you and your family. He may sit at your dinner table during holidays and share childhood stories. But if he earns commissions from the financial products he sells, his incentives are not fully aligned with your best interests. Not because he's ill-intentioned, but because the economic systems we operate in create these inherent contradictions. The structure of the modern financial system makes it nearly impossible for him to offer completely impartial advice, even with the best intentions. He is trapped in a system that rewards certain recommendations over others, regardless of what would actually be best for you. This is a new reality our hunter-gatherer ancestors never had to face. They never had to consider how an invisible incentive system could influence the behavior of tribe members. When a clan member offered advice about where to hunt, that advice was based purely on the shared success of the hunt. Today, invisible structures of incentives permeate all our social interactions in ways we rarely fully understand. The second category is even more complicated. Those who sincerely believe they are acting in our best interest, but whose fundamental beliefs about what constitutes best interest diverge deeply from ours. Think of well-meaning parents who pressure their children to pursue careers they themselves value, but that may not align with their children's passions or talents. They are not trying to cause harm. In fact, they're convinced they're protecting their children from future suffering. But their definition of what makes a good or successful life may be fundamentally incompatible with their child's. Implicit trust in their judgment can lead to years of unhappiness, distorted life choices, and wasted potential. This problem has always existed to some extent. Even in hunter-gatherer societies, there was tension between individual needs and group expectations. But the complexity and diversity of the modern world have dramatically widened that gap. Today, the possibilities for living a meaningful life are so vast and varied that one generation's assumptions about what constitutes a good life can be radically different from the next. And yet, we instinctively trust those closest to us to guide us through these monumental decisions, often without critically examining whether their mental models of the world are still relevant to the realities we face. The third category we must approach with caution are those who operate with significantly outdated or incomplete information, even when they have the best intentions. Consider the family doctor you've known for decades. You trust him implicitly, but if he doesn't stay up to date with the latest medical research, if he isn't familiar with the newest treatments, your trust may be misplaced. Not because he wishes you harm, but because human knowledge is expanding at a rate that makes it impossible for any individual to stay completely current, even within their own specialty. This is an entirely new vulnerability in human history. For tens of thousands of years, the body of knowledge necessary for survival changed relatively little from generation to generation. An elder's advice on how to hunt, find medicinal plants, or build shelter remained valid for centuries. Today, medical knowledge doubles approximately every 73 days. Studies that inform best practices in virtually every field are constantly being updated, revised, and sometimes completely overturned. In this environment, trust based on familiarity or past experience can be dangerously outdated. The fourth category includes those who are themselves victims of belief systems or institutions that distort their judgment, even if they are personally virtuous. Consider the pastor or religious leader you've known since childhood. He may be genuinely devoted to your well-being and deeply committed to his principles. But if he operates within a belief system that prioritizes certain values or behaviors over your psychological well-being or personal autonomy, his guidance can be harmful regardless of his intentions. He is not hypocritical or malicious. He truly believes he's offering you the most valuable advice possible. But he's trapped within a framework of thought that may, in some cases, value conformity over individual well-being. This, too, is something our ancestors rarely faced on such a scale. In the small, homogeneous communities of the past, beliefs and values were generally shared across the entire group. There was no need to navigate radically different value systems or consider how institutional biases could distort the advice one received. Today, we are constantly crossing boundaries between different value systems, often without realizing it. The fifth category includes those who simply lack the capacity to be trustworthy in the specific area where we are placing our trust, regardless of their personal qualities. Consider the longtime friend who offers business advice despite never having run a company, or the brother who gives relationship advice despite his own record of dysfunctional partnerships. They may genuinely want to help. They may even sincerely believe they have valuable insights to offer. But without relevant experience or expertise, their guidance is more likely to be harmful than helpful, no matter how good their intentions. Again, this is a relatively new complexity. In smaller, simpler societies, it was much easier to assess someone's competence. You could directly see whether a hunter consistently brought back food, or whether a shelter builder constructed huts that stayed standing through storms. Today, we assess competence in fields so specialized and esoteric that it's almost impossible for a layperson to distinguish between advice that is sound and advice that only sounds plausible but is fundamentally wrong. The sixth and final category we must question are those who may not be fully aware of their own biases, prejudices, and blind spots, even while sincerely trying to help us. Consider a mentor who built his career in an era with very different power dynamics and social expectations. He may genuinely want to guide you towards success, but his understanding of what constitutes appropriate behavior or effective strategies may be fundamentally misaligned with today's realities. Not because he's deliberately outdated, but because we are all deeply shaped by our formative experiences, often in ways we don't fully realize. This challenge has always existed to some degree, but the acceleration of social and technological change has made it far more pronounced. Our grandparents grew up in a world where certain assumptions about race, gender, sexuality, and ability were rarely questioned. They may have internalized perspectives that we now recognize as harmful, not out of malice, but simply as a product of their time and environment. Their guidance may inadvertently perpetuate systems of inequality or exclusion that they themselves do not fully recognize. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this discussion about trust resonates most with your own experiences? Have you ever found yourself trusting someone close to you, only to later realize that despite their best intentions, the trust may have been misplaced? I know that we often keep such realizations to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of appearing ungrateful or cynical in a world that celebrates unconditional trust as a virtue. But your experiences are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments. I learned to question trust when. Your honesty can help create a space where we can discuss these complexities more openly instead of pretending that trust is always simple and unequivocal. And perhaps by sharing these experiences, we can develop a more nuanced and adaptive approach to deciding whom to trust and under what circumstances. Now, let us explore the broader implications of these considerations. What does it mean to live in a world where implicit trust is no longer adaptive? How do we navigate the complexities of human relationships when the very systems that structure those relationships often create incentives for betrayal, even if subtle or unintentional? First, we must recognize that this is not an argument for universal cynicism. Trusting selectively and strategically is not the same as not trusting. In fact, research consistently shows that societies with high levels of social trust perform better across almost every indicator, from economic prosperity to self-reported happiness. The goal is not to eliminate trust, but to refine it, to make it more robust and adapted to the complexities of the modern world. A crucial step is to separate trust in people from trust in systems, incentives, and circumstances. We can fully trust someone's moral character while simultaneously recognizing that the systems in which they operate may compromise their ability to act according to their best intentions. This distinction is essential for maintaining healthy relationships while protecting ourselves from unintended harm. Consider how this perspective changes family dynamics. Instead of assuming that a close relative will always give the best advice simply because they share your genetic code and genuine affection, we can separately evaluate their knowledge, experience, and the incentive structures in which they operate. This does not mean treating family members with suspicion. It means recognizing that genuine love does not automatically grant expertise in every area, nor does it override systemic pressures that may distort judgment. This approach also has profound implications for how we educate the next generation. Traditionally, we have taught children to trust certain authority figures implicitly: parents, teachers, police officers, doctors. But perhaps a more sophisticated approach is needed in an increasingly complex world. What if, instead of teaching categorical trust, we taught discernment? What if we equipped children with tools to evaluate whom to trust, when, and in which specific domains? This does not mean raising a generation of cynics, but rather a generation of critical thinkers capable of navigating a world where misplaced trust can have significant consequences. It means teaching them to differentiate between a person's moral character and their competence in specific areas. It means helping them understand how systems and incentives shape behavior, sometimes even overriding the best of intentions. There are also fascinating implications for the development of emerging technologies, particularly artificial intelligence and automated systems. As we increasingly delegate decisions to algorithms, whom are we really trusting? The programmers who wrote the original code? The companies that own and operate the systems? The statistical models and databases that inform the decisions? Trust in this context becomes even more diffuse and complicated. Perhaps the most important lesson is that trust in the 21st century must be dynamic and contextual, not static and categorical. We need to recognize that someone can be highly trustworthy in one domain and simultaneously unreliable in another. That even the most moral people can have blind spots, biases, and vulnerabilities to systemic pressures. That trust is not a binary trait permanently assigned to a person, but a continuous evaluation that evolves with circumstances, knowledge, and experience. This more nuanced view of trust has implications for how we structure institutions and societies. Rather than relying primarily on personal integrity, though that remains important, perhaps we should design systems that are robust even when individuals within them are subject to flaws, biases, and distorted incentives. This means transparency, accountability, and meaningful checks and balances at every level. There is a deep human tendency to seek simple solutions to complex problems. We want to divide the world into trustworthy and untrustworthy people and then live our lives according to that categorization. But reality is far more intricate. The same person who would sacrifice their life for you in an emergency might inadvertently give you disastrous financial advice. The doctor who has accurately diagnosed and treated dozens of your illnesses might be dangerously misinformed about a new treatment that could save your life. The spiritual leader who brought comfort and meaning to generations of your family might be promoting views that limit your growth and potential. Recognizing these complexities is not defeatism or cynicism. It is a form of adaptive maturity that allows us to navigate a world where trust remains vital, but where old heuristics for deciding whom to trust are no longer sufficient. It is a way of honoring the ongoing evolution of our cognitive and social capacities, acknowledging that just as our ancestors developed new instincts and intuitions to face the challenges of their time, we too must develop new frameworks for the challenges of ours. And there is something profoundly liberating in this perspective. When we abandon the notion that we must trust certain categories of people unconditionally simply because of their roles or relationships to us, we make space for a more authentic and honest kind of connection. Paradoxically, recognizing the limits of trust can enable deeper and truer relationships, ones based on a clear understanding of each other's capabilities, limitations, and circumstances. Consider how this perspective could transform relationships between parents and children. Instead of assuming unquestionable authority based on the parental role, parents could model for their children how to recognize and admit the limits of their own knowledge and perspectives. They could demonstrate that unconditional love does not require unconditional trust, that in fact, sometimes the deepest love manifests in the humility to say, I'm not sure, or that's not my area of expertise, or even the system I'm part of might be compromising my ability to advise you objectively on this matter. This honesty does not weaken parental authority, it strengthens it, transforming it from something externally imposed into something granted in recognition of authenticity and integrity. It allows children to see their parents not as infallible oracles, but as human beings navigating their own complexities and limitations, doing the best they can in a confusing world. Likewise, consider how this perspective could transform our relationship with social institutions. Instead of trusting educational, financial, medical, or legal systems implicitly simply because they have existed for a long time, or because authority figures endorse them, we could develop a more mature relationship with these institutions. We could recognize their value and utility in specific domains while remaining alert to distorted incentives, systemic biases, and inherent limitations that might compromise their reliability in others. At a broader societal level, this more nuanced perspective on trust could strengthen democracy and civic institutions. Effective democracy does not require blind trust in leaders or systems, but rather constant and informed vigilance. It requires citizens who can discern when trust is warranted and when skepticism is appropriate, when institutions are serving the common good, and when they have been captured by special interests or distorted by misaligned incentives. As we move into an increasingly complex and interconnected future, the question of trust will become even more important. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, social networks, and virtual reality are all fundamentally transforming how we relate to one another and to our institutions. These developments create new vulnerabilities and new forms of exploitation, but also new possibilities for authentic connection and meaningful collaboration. Perhaps the central challenge of our time is reconciling our deep evolutionary need to trust with the realities of a world where unconditional trust rarely serves our best interests. We need to develop a new grammar of trust, one that recognizes its contingent and contextual nature, that differentiates between trust in moral character and trust in competence, and that understands how systems shape behavior independently of individual intentions. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling but perhaps lacked the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we gather here to explore together the big questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with greater wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. Ultimately, the question is not whether we should trust, but how we should trust. It's not about abandoning trust altogether, which would not only be impossible given our evolutionary design, but deeply impoverishing to the human experience. It's about developing a form of trust adapted to the realities of the 21st century, one that allows us to form meaningful connections and cooperate effectively while protecting us from the vulnerabilities inherent in unconditional or misplaced trust. Perhaps the deepest wisdom comes from an apparently paradoxical perspective that the truest and most enduring trust arises when we openly acknowledge its limits. When we admit that even those closest to us, those we most love, and who love us most, have limitations in their ability to advise, guide, or protect us. When we understand that this does not diminish the value of those relationships, but in fact deepens it, transforming them from idealized fantasies into authentic connections between real human beings, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, blind spots, and capacities. As we move together into an uncertain future, perhaps this is the most important kind of trust we can cultivate. Not blind trust in individuals or institutions, but trust in our collective ability to navigate the complexities of the human condition with wisdom, humility, and an ever-deepening understanding of what it means to trust and to be worthy of trust in the extraordinary world we have created.
My name's Robin Ince. I do a show on the radio called The Infinite Monkey Cage, and I love talking about scientific ideas, stories, and technology, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. And it's a beautiful thing to be in a place which is officially, for light entertainment and song and dance, and actually be doing a night of scientific discovery. It's something that at the Albert Hall, I once just did a night with a bunch of physicists, and I'll tell you what, particle physics, it really does work in a dome like that. And so you all know who you've come to see, someone who, as a writer of scientific stories and scientific history, has done incredible work over the last 10 years. So please welcome to the stage Yuval Noah Harari. Are you okay with that, Chair? Yeah. Some people are sometimes deaf in the one ear, aren't they? That's the... We've got an enormous amount to talk about, including why there's a pigeon on the cover, but I'm not going to reveal that yet. The first thing I want to say, as a storyteller, because I think that's what you really managed to bring so much life to sometimes ideas which might only appear to be an equation in people's minds. What were the first stories when you were growing up that really stuck with you, the stories that excited you?
I think I really started with mythology. I had these books about the Greek mythology and biblical mythology for young kids, and I would read them over and over again. And from there I actually went to history. So I kind of skipped the fairy tales and the fictions and went straight to history.
And were you, because I was saying earlier, my son's doing History A-level, and I really think what did it for him was, first of all, finding out about which kings of England were so fat they exploded when they died. And those kind of, it seems with history, we have sometimes gory and strange, and Vlad the Impaler and Countess Bathory and things like that. Did that help lure you in as a child?
I guess to some extent, but I was really interested in kind of the big questions. Also, even before with mythology, of where did everything come from? I mean, why is there something and not just nothing?
And then what were the stories that, because now, I say sapiens, do you say sapiens?
We can say both.
Yeah, we can. We can turn it into a musical number. The Hello Dolly's only just closed here. But I just want to, that point where you thought, I really want to start dealing with these scientific ideas, and how much that felt like a change, and how much that felt like this was just another way of dealing with stories in the same way that you would deal with stories as a historian.
I mean, I think that humans are essentially storytelling animals. I mean, we think in stories. And part of the problem of science is that science often doesn't know what to do with stories and doesn't convey its messages in stories. So it is almost always at this disadvantage. And when you look at the world, so you see that in almost all cases, the people who only understand facts take orders from the people who understand stories. If you think about, I don't know, the nuclear programs of various countries today and in the past. So people who merely understand things like nuclear physics and quantum mechanics, they take their orders from people who understand things like Jewish mythology and Shiite theology and communist ideology. And this is almost always the case. And it creates a lot of problems. Again, you talk with the people who are leading, and we'll get to AI later, but you talk with the people who are leading many of the scientific and technological revolutions of this day, and just now we heard that the Nobel Prize in both physics and chemistry was given to research in AI. And they have this notion that because we develop the technology and because we understand the science, and maybe because they think they are smarter than everybody else, they will decide what to do with what they discover and what they develop, and this is almost never the case. Then comes along somebody who doesn't understand, again, anything about nuclear physics or anything about AI. They understand some mythology, and they give the orders.
Well, that seems, I mean, that disparity, I'm thinking now, tonight there may well be, well, there will be, possibly terrible destruction in Florida. And some of the people who are both using that as a political point are the same people who are also denying the science that comes with our understanding of climate change. And that seems to be one of the problems that we have, which is where people have so much information available to them, they can keep going, well, I'm going to take that bit to justify this story, and I'm going to take that bit, rather than go, I now want to read all these stories. They just go, which one is most useful to me now?
Yeah, I mean, there is a big misunderstanding about information in general and what people do with it. Too many people tend to think that information somehow means truth and knowledge and wisdom, or that information is the raw material from which you construct truth and knowledge. And it's not the case. The truth is a very small subset of all the information in the world. The truth is a very small subset because it's very costly. It takes a lot of time and effort and money to do research and fact check and analyze information in order to get at the truth. Whereas fiction and fantasy and lies, they are very, very cheap. You don't need to research anything, you just write whatever you want. And, the truth is often complicated, and it is sometimes painful, whereas fiction and fantasy can be as simple and as attractive and flattering as you would like them to be. So what we see again and again in history is that as the amount of information in the world grows because of different discoveries and inventions of humanity, it doesn't mean that the amount of truth and knowledge and wisdom in the world grows. And you see that modern societies are as susceptible as Stone Age tribes to fall victim to these cases of mass delusion, like 20th century fascism or 20th century communism. They are as susceptible to that as the Stone Age tribes. So all the discoveries and all the scientific knowledge and all the technology doesn't really protect us from these dangers.
And do you feel that it seems to me that there's certainly quite a few moments in the book where one of the biggest problems is who controls the dissemination of information? So, yeah. I mean, in the last, certainly since Reagan in America and also Thatcher here, where suddenly there was an ability for people to very close, almost have a monopoly on controlling the stories that are going out. Yes, we can all get our stories out on, some form of social media, but we don't have the huge power behind us of the news media.
The key question in information is not necessarily who produces it, but who disseminates it. Especially when it is very cheap to produce information, the bottleneck is human attention. And there you find not the authors, there you find the editors and the curators. They are they sit at the junctions of the information network. And maybe I'll give two examples from history. So one of the most important editorial processes in the history of humankind was editing the Bible. The Bible did not come down from the sky in its finished form. If you look, for instance, at the early history of Christianity, and when do we have the New Testament? So Jesus didn't write the New Testament, and St. Paul didn't write the New Testament, and they didn't read them, of course, because it didn't exist at the time. In the first centuries of Christianity, different Christian authors and different Christian sects and ways of thinking, they produced all kinds of texts. They wrote gospels, not just the 4 that became canonical, many gospels. And they wrote all kinds of prophecies and letters and fables and chronicles and so many different texts. And then there became a problem of what to read. The same way that people today, you open Netflix, so which series to watch, there are so many. You need a recommendation list. So also the early Christians, at a certain point, they needed a recommendation list. And this happened almost 4 centuries after the crucifixion. At the end of the 4th century, there is a committee of bishops and theologians that gathers in 2 cities, in Hippo and then in Carthage, today Tunisia in North Africa, which is a very important Christian center at the time. And this is the committee that comes up with the recommendation list that we know as the New Testament. They created these top 27 texts that every Christian should read. And they made a decision. They didn't write the texts. They were the curators and editors. And they made momentous decisions that shaped the world for the next more than 1,500 years. For example, there was one text which was very popular at the time called the Acts of Paul and Thecla, which told the story of St. Paul and his female disciple Thecla, who was a Christian leader, and she gave sermons and performed miracles and baptized and so forth. And this was a very popular text, and it was used as proof that women can be leaders in the church. And then there were other texts. For instance, a letter that was supposedly a letter from St. Paul to Timothy, one of his disciples, but most scholars today believe it was a 2nd century forgery in the name of St. Paul, which basically said that women should not be leaders, they should remain silent, their job is to bear children and raise children and do whatever the men tell them to do. And in the Council of Carthage, which is I think 397 or 396 CE, the committee decides that the Acts of Paul and Thecla will stay out of the top 27 recommendation list, but the letter to Timothy will be in, and this is 1 Timothy, which is still in millions and millions of Bibles all over the world. And this shaped how people think, even to this day. And, if you fast forward to the modern age, so again, the curators and editors of news, of information, they are some of the most powerful people in society. They decide what the questions of the day are, what people will be talking about, what people will be thinking about. And, in the French Revolution, one of the people who shapes the course of the French Revolution more than anybody else, until he's murdered, is Jean-Paul Marat, who is the editor of one of the most popular newspapers of the time, L'Ami du Peuple, the friend of the people. And then you have, for instance, Lenin, that before he was Soviet dictator, his most important job was editor of the newspaper Iskra. And Mussolini began as a journalist, then he became editor of the Avanti, the fascist newspaper, and then dictator of Italy. So this was a kind of ladder of promotion: journalist, editor, dictator. And if you think, who are the most important editors in the world today? They are not human beings. They are algorithms. With all the talk about the AI is coming to take our jobs, one of the first jobs that was automated was not taxi drivers or coal miners or textile workers, it was editors. The editors of Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and YouTube, They are not human beings. Lenin's whole job is now in the hand of algorithms. They decide what will be the top of the newsfeed, what people will be talking about, what people will be thinking about.
See, that's very, because it immediately obviously made me think, you know, Boris Johnson, journalist, Michael Gove, journalist, David Cameron was PR for Carlton Television. And it seems to, you know, what those jobs and what you're saying about is they're jobs in which you are not looking for truth, they're jobs in which you're looking for sales of your story. So that's the...
That depends on how you do your job. I mean, that's the biggest question when we talk about algorithms or when we talk about humans, is what is the goal? If you aim for sales and user engagement, that often leads in very dangerous directions. You know, the algorithms, what they discovered over the last 15 years or so, is that if you want to increase user engagement, and engagement, you know, it sounds a good thing, like who doesn't want to be engaged? But the algorithms discovered that the easiest way to increase user engagement, which means to make people spend more time on the platform, is to press the anger button, or the fear button, or the greed button in the brain. This is how you glue people to the screens. And this resulted in this epidemic of toxic information, which is drowning democracies all over the world. You know, democracy in essence is a conversation. Dictatorship is dictate. One person dictates everything. Democracy is a conversation. And what we are seeing right now all over the world is that we have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and humans are no longer able to converse. Humans are no longer able to hold a rational conversation, not just to talk is easy, to listen to the other side. And in every country, they have these special explanations of why is it happening in the US. But then you go to Canada, you go to Brazil, you go to the Philippines, it's everywhere the same. And it is because the algorithms are managing at present the conversation, and their motivation is not to have a rational and meaningful conversation, but to increase user engagement. And people are very engaged. What we desperately need is more boring politics, but it's just becoming more and more exciting and engaging every day. And the tragedy of it is that this was known for centuries. This is not the first time this happened in history. If you look, for instance, at the print revolution in early modern Europe, and if you go today to Silicon Valley and you talk to the people who are leading the present revolution, they would often tell you the story of the print revolution as a kind of model. That look, when print was invented or brought to Europe, it broke the chokehold of the Catholic Church over the European information system, and this led to the scientific revolution. And this is what we are doing right now. And the tragedy is that they just don't know the history. The print revolution did not lead to the scientific revolution. There are 200 years between when Gutenberg brings print to Europe in the middle of the 15th century until you see the real flowering of the scientific revolution in the 17th century with people like Newton. In between, you have the worst wave of wars of religion in European history and the worst wave of witch hunting in European history. And the big bestsellers of a late 15th and 16th century Europe were not scientific texts like that of Copernicus. Very few people read Copernicus. It was witch hunting manuals and extremist religious tracts, because user engagement, it's very engaging. Like one of the really first big bestsellers was a book with immense influence until this very day called The Hammer of the Witches, Malleus Maleficarum, which was the kind of do-it-yourself manual to identifying and killing witches, something everybody needs at home. And it was a huge bestseller. And to understand why, so just to get a sense, a feel of what kind of book it was, so there is an entire section in the book about discussing the ability of witches to steal penises from men. And you have all these evidence that the author, Heinrich Kramer, brings. Like, for instance, he has a story about a man who wakes up one morning to discover that his penis is gone. And he suspects immediately the local witch. So he goes to the local witch in his village and kind of convinces her, forces her, bring me my penis back. And the witch says, okay. And she tells him, climb this tree. You'll find a bird's nest at the top of the tree. So the man climbs the tree and finds a bird's nest. And in the nest, he finds all the penises that the witch stole from different men in the nearby villages. And she tells him, okay, you can take your own. And the man, of course, chooses the biggest one. And then the witch tells him, no, you can't take this one. I know, this one belongs to the parish priest, not to you. Now, you understand why this book was a bestseller, who sold a few more copies than Copernicus's On the Revolutions of the Heaven, with all these mathematical equations about the movements of the planets. Now, this all sounds very funny until you look at the consequences. Because it was this book and other books like it that fueled the great European witch hunt, which was a modern phenomenon, not a medieval phenomenon, in which tens of thousands of people were tortured and killed in the most horrendous ways. Again, to give just one example, in Munich, a family, the Pappenheimer family, was arrested by the authorities because they were accused of being witches. And according to the methods recommended by the Hammer of the Witches of how to interrogate witches, you do it by torturing them until they confess. And the family's mother, father, and 3 kids, and the inquisitors start by torturing the youngest child, a 10-year-old child, Hans, and they torture him in really unspeakable ways until he breaks and confesses that his mother and the other family members are all witches, that they went to meet Satan, that they molest and eat children, that they get involved in these orgies, and that they murder people and summon hailstorms. And with this confession, they then break, and again, they torture and break the other family members, and they are all executed, including the 10-year-old boy. And this was the result of this wave of toxic information about witches and Satan and witch hunts, which did not have a single grain of truth in it. And when you look at Europe in the 16th century, you see it kind of washed by this flood of toxic information. And the key thing is that the printing press, it just prints. It doesn't judges what is true and what is false, what is reliable and what is unreliable. You cannot expect technology by itself to make progress there. If you just flood the world with more information, you don't get necessarily the truth and you don't get more knowledge.
I think that the Malice Maleficarum is cause I have actually read it. The Folio Society bring it out about once every 10 years. And it's one of those interesting things which I often say to science authors, don't write a science book that's right, because it means that after 5 years it won't be printed anymore because you'll be wrong. You need to write absolute nonsense if you want to keep, so Eric von Daniken wrote about all of these, this is actually a runway for aliens, and these pyramids, they were built by some aliens as well. And his books are still published, and he's one of the most successful authors because he wrote something that was entirely wrong. Whereas those who are writing things that are accurate have to keep rewriting the book.
Yeah, basically in science, you only publish corrections. That's it. If you think, what do scientific journals actually publish? They only publish corrections to previous knowledge. If somebody comes and says, okay, Einstein was right, and Darwin was right, and all these people were right, so what? So this is not a reason to publish what we already know that. If you want to get published and if you want to get ahead, you need to find something that Einstein was wrong about or that Einstein didn't know, some lacuna in the theory. And this is really the foundation of science and of all trustworthy institutions. Now, we live in an era when people are losing trust in institutions, which is extremely dangerous because the only way for society to function without trustworthy institutions is with a dictatorship. Democracy is built on trust, dictatorships are built on terror. For democracy to function, there need to be some institutions that people trust. If they lose trust in all the institutions, the only choice left is between anarchy, societal collapse, or a dictatorship which doesn't need trust because its fuel, it functions on terror. And then people ask, so okay, how do I know which institution to trust? And the best yardstick I know about is institutions that have strong self-correcting mechanisms, institutions that are not only willing, but are actively seeking their own mistakes and errors and are willing to identify them and to correct them. So if you compare, for instance, religious institutions with scientific institutions, this is the key difference. That in a religious institution, the claim usually would be that we possess the absolute truth. There can be no error in what we say. So there is no room for self-correction. If you think about the Bible, for instance, they keep printing the same text again and again and again for centuries. There is no mechanism in Judaism and in Christianity to correct errors in the Bible, whether factual errors or ethical errors. You know, you think about something like the Ten Commandments. So the 10th commandment actually endorses slavery, because the 10th commandment says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or house or slaves, which implies that God is perfectly okay with people owning slaves. He's just very angry if you coveted the slaves of somebody else. No. You shouldn't do that. And there is no mechanism to amend it. You know, if you compare it, say, to the US Constitution, which people often say the US Constitution endorsed slavery, and that's true, but the US Constitution also included a self-correcting mechanism. There was a clause in the Constitution that we know we are not perfect. You know, the Ten Commandments start with, I am your Lord God. I wrote this, so you can't correct this. The US Constitution starts with, we the people. We wrote this, we are just people, we are just humans, maybe we made mistakes. So here is a mechanism that if future generations find a mistake in something we wrote, this is how you change it. It's not easy, but it can be done. And the US Constitution was eventually amended to outlaw slavery, to ban slavery. Now, in the Ten Commandments, there is no 11th commandment which says, well, if you want to change one of the previous commandments, you can do it by a 2/3 majority vote. So we still have the same text as it was written in the Middle East during the Iron Age with its endorsement of slavery. Now, science, it's built, I mean, the very central pillar of science is the self-correcting mechanism. You want to understand an institution, try to understand the incentive of the people in the institution. How do they get a promotion? So in a church or in the Jewish rabbinate, how do you get a promotion? If you say that whatever the elders said before you is correct, you have a good chance of getting a promotion after promotion until you become chief rabbi or pope. But in science, it doesn't work. If you just go and say Einstein was right, so what? You will not get a position in university. You will certainly not get Nobel Prize for that. I mean, the whole incentive structure is publish or perish. And in order to publish, the only thing that scientific journals publish is corrections and amendments. In the sense, I discovered something that Einstein didn't know, they meant, okay, we'll publish it. And if you want to go all the way to win Nobel Prize, you need to discover either a very big mistake in the previous theories or a very big lacuna, something some people didn't know. So this is an incentive structure that inspires trust. If you ask an institution, tell me about your biggest mistakes, and it tells you, we never make mistakes, don't trust it. If you ask an institution, tell me about your biggest mistakes, and it tells you, do you have a year or two, we can tell you a lot about not just factual mistakes, also about, again, moral mistakes, ethical mistakes. Like you go today to university, you will study in many seminars about how scientific disciplines were implicated, were responsible to some extent to horrible historical crimes. Slavery, imperialism, persecution of minorities, of women. Yes, anthropologists and historians and archaeologists and biologists, but they were part of it. They were partly to blame. And at least for me, this inspires trust.
So, that thing when you're looking at information that we need, because I was thinking when you mentioned the Bible, Francesca Stavrokopoulou, wonderful Bible scholar, she said the trouble with the Bible is it's a book written by men with daddy issues, which I thought was kind of and perhaps one should say it was a book edited by men with daddy issues, because, for instance, you were talking about childhood interest in myths, and as we've seen in the last 20 years, a lot of writers, people like Natalie Haynes, have returned to these myths and found out that they were entirely rewritten, and that the message, again, is very often a message of subjugation and of misogyny. But then it just seems to set with the power structure so anything that fits the power structure at the time is therefore we're going to keep that story and we're going to change that story. And then it seems to me quite surprising how long those stories remain intact. What do we need now? Because we love always to think, don't we, that, oh no, but now we've moved on, now we're better at this. And yet every time we look back century by century, we see the same mistakes being made in terms of those who are oppressed and those who are marginalized.
And first of all, luckily, it's not the same mistakes. Humanity sometimes does learn some lessons. Otherwise, it would be hopeless. If you cannot point to any progress that was done in history by now, we might just as well give it up. If all the generations before us could not get anything right, could not improve anything, what are the chances that we can do it? So I think it's also important for historians, for others, to acknowledge improvements when they do occur, and they occur sometimes. But with regard to the survival and the power of myth, and especially of very ancient mythologies, the two things to realize, first of all, the only thing that can replace one story is another story. You can never replace a story just with a list of facts and statistics and so forth, because this is not the way that people think. You can use facts and statistics to puncture lots of holes in the existing mythology. It will still hold. What you need to do is just tell a different story, a better story, and then you don't need to puncture any holes in the old story. So that's the first principle. The second is that the longer the story survives, the stronger it becomes. And then it becomes more difficult to replace it. I mean, you look at the world's mythologies. So thousands of years ago, there were so many mythologies. Like every little tribe and every people and country had very different mythologies, and very few of them survived. And today, almost all the world knows just, 3, 4, 5 mythologies top. And they are extremely powerful. And every time we try to tell a new story, the old mythologies sneak back. Because they are now so powerful after being there for thousands of years. And again, this is something that science struggles with. And I think part of what I try to do and other people try to do is try to tell better scientific stories, but they still need to be stories if they are to appeal to human beings, because we think in stories.
See, I find the mythologies, you might have been there in Singapore, there's this wonderful Museum of Asian Cultures. And on the first floor, each room has a different religion. And you see these wonderful mythologies with playful, impish, sexual, rude, angry, strange, all manner of demons and imps. And then you get to the Abrahamic one, which kind of becomes a dictatorship in which someone created us and is now just very disappointed, and we've been born with original sin. And it kind of feels like those mythologies have so much play and so much representation of who we are as well, all these different things going on in our minds. And then what we get with the Abrahamic faith is closer to me, in a lot of the ways it's interpreted, as a dictatorship.
Because they were created in an age of monarchies and empires. And, God is often depicted as a king. And a lot of the political realities of the Middle East in the Iron Age they were incorporated into the mythology. So God is often made in the image of the kings, of the emperors of the day. And this is still with us. So we need to take these stories extremely seriously because they still shape our culture, they still shape our psychology, they still shape our politics.
In terms of going, in the book, you look a lot at the kind of the problems of the algorithm, and especially when the algorithm becomes something without any human, once it just becomes a circle of computers. So looking at politics now, for instance, looking at the American election, do you imagine that someone like Trump could have been a president or indeed presidential candidate 30 years ago? Did it require the technology and the social media and this way of being bombarded with so many possible truths for us to return to this kind of politician?
It seems so, definitely. And again, what is really necessary to understand is the power of information technology and of social media in relation to democracy. Because democracy, as we said earlier, in essence, it's a conversation. It's a group of people coming together, talking to each other, listening to each other, in an attempt to reach some common decision about the important issues of the day. Now, for most of history, this type of system could only work on small scales. The only examples we know of ancient democracies are city-states, like Athens or Republican Rome, or even smaller towns and tribes. We have no example before the modern age of a large-scale democracy, of an entire country with millions of people spread over thousands of kilometers that is managed democratically. And the reason was not that people didn't know about democracy. I mean, originally, most human societies, certainly in the Stone Age, most hunter-gatherer bands and tribes were democratic. And also, many of the first towns and city-states were democratic. The ideas were known. And if you look, for instance, at the Roman Empire, the Romans know everything about democracy. And even the emperors, they know that the Romans love the democratic ideal, so they never claim to be autocrats. They keep up the facade of democracy, like in Putin's Russia, or like in Maduro's Venezuela. In the Roman Empire, you still have every year elections for consuls and praetors. There is the Senate, there is the popular assemblies. They keep the facade, but it's not a democracy. It's not a republic. It's an autocracy. So what happens as the size of the polity becomes bigger, the conversation collapses. I mean, you can have most citizens or a significant part of the citizenry of a city gathering together in the main square to discuss the major issues of the day. But you cannot do it with millions of people spread over the whole of Italy or the whole of the Mediterranean. So as the size of the polity becomes bigger, democracy inevitably collapsed. And if it was something about the Caesar family that destroyed the Roman Republic, we should have seen at least large-scale democracies elsewhere, in India, in Central America, in China, nowhere. Because the information technology of the day did not allow millions of people to have a conversation like that. The large-scale democracy becomes possible for the first time in history in the late modern age, due to the invention of several critical information technologies. First, it is the newspaper. Then it's the telegraph and the radio and television and all that. Only then we begin to see large-scale democracies. So large-scale democracies, they are built on top of information technology. Information technology is not a side dish. We have democracy, and you have information technology. No, it's the basis. And over the last 20 years, there has been a major, major revolution in information technology. So inevitably, there is an earthquake in the building built on top of it, democracy. And you see it all over the world, and it only makes sense. You now have billions of people spending hours every day on these platforms, this becomes the main way for people to form organizations, to recruit people, to motivate people for political action. So it has immense impact. Now, it's not necessarily a negative impact. History is never deterministic, and technology is not deterministic. The question is what we do with it. Unfortunately, what we did with it, with social media and with algorithms over the last 10, 15 years was the wrong thing. And we now have an even bigger wave coming of AI, which is going to change the world in so many dramatic ways. We are still in control, maybe for the next few years, but we have to make some really wise decisions in the next, say, 5 to 10 years before we lose control. Because what's different about AI compared to every previous technology in history is that this time we can really lose control to the technology. All the tales we had throughout history about losing control of technology, it was really just metaphors. You can't really have a printing press in charge of society. You can't really have a radio set or an atom bomb in charge of society because they can't make any decisions. AI is the first technology in history that can make decisions by itself, can invent new ideas by itself, can learn and change by itself, which means it's the first technology which is an agent and not a tool. A printing press is a tool. It's in my hands. I decide it will print the Bible, it will print Copernicus, I decide. AI, no. The AI can decide by itself which story to create and which story to promote. It can really take over. And, you know, there is a huge confusion around AI because now it's kind of the hottest thing, certainly in the market. If you want to make people buy something or invest their money in a company, you attach the label, oh, it's an AI. So everything now becomes AI, and it becomes difficult to know, so what really is AI? Not every machine is an AI. If you think, for instance, about machines we have for a long time, like coffee machine, most coffee machines are not AIs. If you approach your coffee machine and you press a button and the machine does exactly what it was pre-programmed to do, like you press this button, it produces an espresso cup, this is not an AI. This is just an automatic machine.
But if it says, I thought you'd prefer soup, then we realize something's changing here.
Exactly. If it tells you, before you press any button, it tells you, I've been watching you, I've been learning you, and I've been watching millions of other people, and based on everything I know about you, I predict you would like coffee, so I made it for you. Or I think, based on everything I know about you, that actually it's better for you now to eat soup than to drink coffee, then it's an AI. When it starts learning and changing, and because of this ability to learn and change, then by definition, we cannot predict how it will develop, and it could escape our control, and in the worst case scenarios, enslave or annihilate us. There are, of course, much better scenarios. It can be really the best technology we ever invented. It can provide us with the best healthcare in history, with the best education in history, but it all depends on the decisions we are going to make in the next few years.
I'm definitely going to invent a machine that at some point, every now and again, the coffee machine just goes, you've had enough. And that will just be enough for people to believe it may well have become sentient. But that's an interesting thing to me, which is, you know, as you mentioned in the book, you know, one of the most common images of AI going rogue is in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where we have Hal, and Hal actually has become conscious. But I get the feeling reading the book that really the AI may well, you know, if it does in any way destroy us or start to, you know, destabilize civilization, it won't even be conscious. It will still be, it won't have made a decision to destroy us. It will be something which has just run wild enough. Does that sound fair? Because I feel that AI and consciousness is still, you know, possibly a long, you know, it's the point that if AI beats us at chess, it starts to gloat. And then we realize, oh, it's beginning to get conscious now. It's kind of, but it feels to me that long before that, we may well have allowed AI to run wild.
We just don't know. I mean, the issue of consciousness is extremely complicated because we don't understand consciousness in humans. We don't understand consciousness in other animals. Again, there is huge confusion about the very meaning of the term. People confuse it with intelligence. So maybe just to clarify, intelligence is the ability to pursue goals and to solve problems on the way to attaining your goal. Your goal could be to win a chess. Your goal could be to drive a car to a particular point. Your goal could be to identify a disease. This is intelligence, and this is what we see now with the development of AI. It's the development of intelligence. Consciousness is something else. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Now, we tend to confuse intelligence and consciousness because in humans and also in other mammals, they go together. We solve problems, we set ourselves targets, goals, and we solve problems on the way there based on our feelings. It's our feelings that define the goals for us. We rely on our feelings to solve problems. So it's very hard for us to even differentiate the two. As far as we know, AI and computers in general until today, they don't have consciousness at all. They have intelligence. In many fields, in some fields, they are already more intelligent than us, but they don't rely on feelings to solve problems, to win a chess, for instance. But as AI becomes more and more sophisticated, it becomes harder to know for sure. How can we be sure that the AI is not conscious? We can't, with other people and with other animals also, we have no test for consciousness. It's really just a social convention. This is something that goes back thousands of years. Philosophers in ancient India and China and Greece, they already knew that there is no objective test for consciousness. So it's just social convention. We accept that other people are conscious. When it comes to animals, you can see it most clearly. When there is emotional attachment, we usually also grant consciousness to animals, like to pets, to dogs and cats and so forth. But we tend not to do it to animals we eat, because we don't have the same kind of emotional attachment. Now, what happens once you have emotional attachments and relationships with AIs? There will be, I think, a big pressure to start recognizing them as conscious entities, even if they are not, and really, we can't tell. And there are a lot of commercial interests, commercial reasons to produce AIs that mimic consciousness, that mimic feelings. It could be for good purposes, you know, whether it's in healthcare or education, an AI that can show us empathy, and we feel that it's empathic would be much more successful in giving us care or in educating us. There could also be dangerous reasons to do it, to manipulate people. We talked earlier about all these algorithms manipulating social media, and they really manipulated attention. The big battle in the 2010s and early 2020s was for control of human attention. But if you want to persuade people to buy something, to vote for a politician, to adopt a certain view, the ultimate weapon is not attention, it's intimacy. An intimate relationship can convince you far more effectively to change your mind about something than just grabbing your attention. You know, throughout history, emperors and dictators and governments, they developed tools to control human attention, to mass produce attention. Like you live in Nazi Germany, and everybody, if Hitler gives a speech on the radio, everybody must open the radio and listen to the speech. They control mass attention. But this is not intimacy. The radio has no intimate relationship with you. Now, for the first time in history, we are about to have the technology to mass produce intimacy. Millions, even billions of AIs that could fake intimacy, and in many ways can even be better at it than human beings. I mean, one of the things that humans are very frustrated with in their relationships in life is that other people often fail to understand how we feel or ignore how we feel. And we tend to go through life kind of yearning that somebody would understand us. Like we want our parents to understand us, our friends, our spouses, our teachers, our bosses, and very often they don't. And the reason they don't is because they are too preoccupied with their own feelings. Like your husband comes back from work, grumpy because of something that happened at work, and doesn't pay attention to how you feel. And this is frustrating. This will never happen with AI. It will never be grumpy from work. It is a machine that can focus its entire attention, 100% of its attention, only on you, only on deciphering how you feel. Again, based on, like it could follow you for years and know everything that you forgot about yourself, it still remembers. We learn to understand every tiny muscle movement in your facial expression. What are the emotional implications of this frown or of this smile? It could be far better than humans at deciphering our emotions and therefore at creating this intimacy. And then the big question is there really a consciousness behind it, or is it all fake? And this is going to be one of the big questions, I think, of the 21st century, socially, also politically and legally. Do we recognize AIs as persons? And you could have, wars or huge disagreements between countries when some countries recognize AIs as persons with rights and other countries don't. And the current debates and conflicts about human rights will be as nothing compared to such a world. There are countries, like the US is the lead example, where the path to recognizing AIs as persons is already wide open. I'm not sure how the situation is in the UK, but according to US law, corporations are persons. Now, until today, this was just legal fiction, that US law recognizes Google and General Electric and Nike and whatever as legal persons with rights. For instance, freedom of speech. This was Supreme Court decision from, I think, 2010 in Citizens United, all about whether corporations can donate money in lobbying to politicians. And the argument was they are legal persons, they have freedom of speech, donating money to politicians is freedom of speech. So, and the Supreme Court accepted it. So until today, this was just a metaphor, because all the decisions of Google or General Electric or any other company was made by human beings. The company could not actually make a decision. You needed a company executive, accountant, lawyer to make a decision. But AI can make decisions by itself. Now, what happens if you now incorporate an AI? You do this magic ceremony in a lawyer's office, and this is now a corporation. And according to US law, this is now a person. And this person can make decisions by itself. It can open a bank account, for instance. It can go online and hire its services in, writing texts to people, earn money, and then invest its money in the stock exchange. And because if it's a really good AI, it will know how to invest money better than most humans. So at least theoretically, it could become the richest person in the US. So think about it. The richest person in the US is not a human being, and it has freedom of speech, which, for instance, says it can donate billions of dollars to politicians to lobby for more rights to AIs. And again, this is the technological path is still bumpy, but the legal path is wide open.
See, that's probably a good story, that one, because once you start scaring the billionaires, then they start to go off. What do you mean I'm not going to be the richest person? My love robot is, and then everything kind of changes there. We're going to have to take an interval. There's going to be a QR code. I've still not asked you about the pigeon. We'll begin that.
The pigeon,
there's
right.
so much. No, we'll have to do that in the second half. There's going to be a QR. Oh, there it is. And if you click on that, and then any questions that you would like to ask Yuval, I will read out, and we'll deal with your questions and the pigeon in the second half. Thank you very much, everyone, so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the second half. We have to start with the pigeon. So, so tell us the story of why it was decided in the end, this huge book about so many different and complex ideas should be represented in the bookshop by a pigeon.
Well, there are several levels to it. I mean, on the simplest level, there are some stories in the book about carrier pigeons as an information system, and especially about one pigeon, which 100 years ago was the most famous bird in the world, which was credited with saving an entire American battalion during the First World War. So this is kind of the first level. Then the second level is that we wanted something organic. On, all these AIs and computers, and we wanted something organic on the cover, because the world is now in this tug of war between the organic and the inorganic. Humans, like pigeons, we are organic beings. And part of that is that we live by organic cycles, like day and night, summer and winter, times of activity and times of rest, of sleep. And computers and algorithms and AIs, they are not organic. They are far more different from us than pigeons are. They are always on. They never need to rest. And part of what is happening in the world is that as the AIs become more and more important as decision makers, as they take over more and more systems, the big question is, will they force us to try and function by a kind of inorganic timescale which will kill us? Because if you keep an organic entity on all the time, it eventually just collapses and dies. Or we can make the AIs slow down and adapt to organic time. So, I'll just give maybe one example if you think about the financial system. So traditionally, finance was a system created by human beings. Even bankers and investors are human beings. And they need time to sleep. They want to spend time with their family. They want to go on vacation. They want to go on holiday. So if you think about the most important financial market in the world, Wall Street, it's open only 9:30 in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Mondays to Fridays, that's it. And it's also closed on Christmas and Martin Luther King Day and so forth. This is how a human organic system functions. Now, as AIs take over the financial system, there is increasing pressure on bankers and investors and so forth to be on all the time. If you go on vacation, if you sleep, you are left behind. And the same thing is happening to journalists, the same thing is happening to politicians, and this is really terrible. So the pigeon also kind of talks to this tension between the organic and the inorganic. And the third level, it goes back to mythology and to a linguistic misunderstanding. In Hebrew, the word for dove is also pigeon. In the ancient Middle East, there are just no doves at all. There are just pigeons. This is maybe why there is no peace in the Middle East, because there are no doves. And so in the biblical story of Noah and the flood, Noah doesn't send a dove, he sends a pigeon. And I know that pigeons have this terrible reputation, like in central London, they are rats with wings. But at least Noah's bird that went to see whether the flood is over was a pigeon. And we are now in this information flood, and this is the kind of my pigeon that I'm sending to see if the flood may be over.
Well, that actually does bring us... That brings us, you were mentioning there the war in the Middle East, and the first question that we received from the audience is, what is your stance on the current conflict in Palestine? Well, it's a very tough question, obviously.
But a very important question, and as the conflict becomes worse and worse, and it's like, I have a doctor friend who tells me that as long as the patient is still alive, things can get worse. And it's the same in the Middle East. You think you've hit rock bottom, there is still a long way to go, and unfortunately it can be covered very, very quickly. Things can become even worse, much worse. And I would say two things. I mean, first of all, again, going back to mythology, the conflict, the tragedy of the conflict, but also the ray of hope in the conflict, is that the conflict is not about anything objective. It's not the laws of physics or the laws of biology that force the people to fight. It's mythological stories in their minds. Because there is no shortage of land between the Mediterranean and Jordan River to build houses and schools and factories and hospitals for everyone. There is no shortage of food, so that nobody should be hungry. There is no shortage of water. Yes, it's a desert mostly, but we now know how to desalinize water from the Mediterranean. There is enough water. There is no shortage of energy. So what are people fighting over? They are fighting over mythical stories in their minds. They are saying God gave this whole place to us, and we cannot compromise on God's present. If it was up to me, yes, I'll compromise, but I can't compromise on behalf of God. And again, the ray of hope there is that if just people change their minds, we don't need to kind of create more land. We don't need to create anything. We just need to change our minds. But it's very, very difficult to change people's minds. And the place that I would start, and this is the second thing that I think very important to say, that many wars, they begin in the mind with things that the mind just refuses to accept. There is some, like the mind says, I cannot contain this thing. There is no room in my mind to contain this thing, but it is out there in the world. So instead of changing my mind to find room for it, I will just destroy it in the world. And this is war. The attempt of many minds to destroy something that they just can't contain. And in this case, on both sides, you see that people just cannot contain, refuse to accept the very existence or the right to exist of the other side. It should be very, very simple to acknowledge that in this land, you have 7 million Palestinians who were almost all of them born there. They have nowhere else to go. They have a right to exist. They have a right to exist in security and prosperity. And in the same land, there also are 7 million Jews who are also mostly born there. They have nowhere to go, and they also have a right to exist in security and prosperity. And this is something that too many people, both back home and also around the world, just cannot contain. They don't find room in their minds for both of these things. They can only acknowledge half of reality. They see one people and say, yes, they have a right, but they can't see the other people and their right to exist. And as long as this continues, the war will continue. And again, the first step, and of course every side says, but they want to destroy us. And both sides are correct. Again, the tragedy is that it's not paranoia. Both sides are correct when they say they want to destroy us. But it's very difficult to change the minds of other people. It's a bit easier to start by changing our own mind. And the first step is simply to acknowledge the full reality that there is another people and they also have a right to exist.
Thinking of that in terms of the technology, discussing in the book, on so many situations, including this, it again becomes a binary thing. Are you with us? Are you against us? Which side are you on? As opposed to, say, being on the side of peace, on the side of... Do you see that there is a way of adapting technology so that we, again, in America, the way that we've seen the kind of the two sides, and in particular, when you see MAGA people, it's like this has become a religious belief almost. Can we start using this technology? How do we turn, how do we as an audience, how do we stop those algorithms that make everything a binary situation? How do we start trying to turn these algorithms into something which makes the sky wider rather than narrower?
I mean, so there are two questions here. I mean, what can we do, at least starting with ourselves in changing our minds, and then how do we control the technology that is messing with our minds? So again, it's always easier to blame the other side. They should change their minds. But it's always easier to start by changing our own minds, because even though it's very difficult, it's a bit easier than getting into somebody else's mind and changing it. It starts by kind of being more charitable and generous in how we interpret the opinions of other people and what other people say. Like somebody says something, there are 1,000 different ways to interpret it. Don't choose the worst interpretation you can think of. Choose the most charitable, or maybe the most charitable, but a more charitable interpretation. So again, to take one of the main discussions today all over the world about immigration. Don't immediately assume that if somebody opposes immigration, then he is a fascist or she is a fascist, or if somebody is in favor of less strict rules on immigration, then they are traitors who want to destroy the country. Immigration really is a difficult subject. I mean, I don't think that anybody thinks that there is just an unlimited right to immigration, that any amount of people can go anywhere they want in the world. This is just not workable. So, I mean, the democratic way is to have a conversation about it. Some people want stricter rules, some people want looser rules, and we can have the conversation, and we can try different policies. This is what democracy is all about. But if we turn it into this kind of Manichaean struggle between good and evil, that are vilifying the other side, then this takes, again, something that should be up for a democratic conversation and turning it into a life and death struggle which destroys democracy. Now we have the problem that the algorithms, even if we try to make the effort to be more charitable and generous, the algorithms are constantly kind of shifting and controlling the discussion and pushing it in ways that make it more engaging and exciting, but destructive. And here we need regulations and we need institutions. So two key regulations that should be enacted and should be agreed upon is, first of all, that no counterfeit humans. That algorithms and bots cannot pretend to be human beings. They are welcome to join the conversation in some cases. Like you want to get medical advice, it's okay to get an advice from an AI, provided it identifies itself as an AI. If you have, say, let's say on Twitter, some story gains a lot of attention, and you also want to know, oh, so many people are interested in that story, I also want to know what everybody's talking about, we need to know that it's really humans interested in that story, it's not bots that are pushing it. So we should not have bots impersonating people on social media. And anybody who says, what about freedom of speech? Well, bots don't have freedom of speech. Humans have it. So that's one key regulation. The other, which we mentioned already previously, is that companies should be responsible for the actions of their algorithms. Not for the actions of the users. If a human user published some hate-filled conspiracy theory, I'm in the camp of the people who think we should be very careful before we tell Facebook or Twitter to start censoring real human users. The problem is not that this person has compiled some conspiracy theory. The problem is then that the algorithm of the company deliberately promoted this content at the expense of other content, pushed it to the top of the newsfeed, recommended it to more people, and the company should be liable for that, for what its algorithms are doing. The last thing I would say is that regulations can only go so far, because as we mentioned earlier, AIs are not tools, they are agents. They can learn and change by themselves, which is why nobody has any idea how they will be like, what they will be doing, how the world would look like in 10 years. We cannot anticipate everything and regulate in advance. So what we need is to build living institutions staffed by some of the best human talent, but also with enough money to buy the latest technological toys to understand the front line of the technological development, and is able to understand and react to things on the fly. And before we even think about regulation, regulations are like our teeth. Before you have teeth, you need eyes to see what you're biting. So we cannot have a democratic discussion about regulating AI if we don't understand what is happening. And who can we rely on to tell us what is happening? The companies that we are supposed to regulate, the 2 or 3 countries in the world that are leading the AI revolution? I mean, how are people in Nigeria or in Brazil supposed to know what is really happening at the forefront of the development of AI? So the first thing we need is an international institution with a lot of funding from government that is able to understand what is really happening and to start a human discussion about what we do about it.
The next question, nice easy one for you next one. It's very, it reminds me of Harlan Ellison's wonderfully titled short story, I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream. Will artificial intelligence replace God?
Potentially, yes. I mean, if it can replace newspaper editors, so potentially yes, because especially if you think about textual religions which are based on texts. So the word of God comes from a text. This was the kind of the big invention of religions of the book, like Judaism and Christianity and Islam, that God speaks to us through a book, through a text. And for centuries, these religions just wrote texts about texts about texts. These were the mouthpieces of God. The rabbis, the imams, the theologians, this is what they do. They read texts and write texts. And now we have something that can read text and write texts like no human being. No human rabbi is able to read all the texts ever produced by in the Jewish tradition. So everybody reads the Bible and the Mishnah and the Talmud, but you cannot read all the texts of every rabbi that lived in Yemen or Poland like 300 years ago. Now you can. There is something that can. You have this AlphaGo that beat the world champion at Go, and you have AlphaFold that knows how to fold all the proteins in the world. You can have AlphaRabbi that just read all the texts, not a single one is left out, and can find patterns in the texts that escaped all the human rabbis over centuries. And then the big question for a religion like Judaism is, what do you do with it? Do you accept its new ideas, its revolutionary interpretations? It's a big question. I don't know what the answer is.
Can you write a screenplay?
I'll say one more thing about it. Because the whole idea around religions of the book is they want to get humans out of the loop. Because previously, you wanted to know what God said, you had to speak with a human. Like if you're in ancient Greece, you go to the Pythia, or you go to some priestess or priest. What does Artemis want? What does Zeus tell us? And then people said, but how can you trust a human? You can't. So they came up with the book. Don't trust the human, trust the book. The book is never wrong. And humans can't change the book. And so, in a way, the text is more authoritative than the human beings. And now, when you have this kind of super text, what do? Especially when the text can talk back to you. I mean, again, one big problem in Judaism and all these religions for centuries is that you have all these questions about the text, and the text is silent. What did you mean by this? You need to go to a human again to interpret the text. Now you have a text that can talk back. And if the rabbis say, no, this is not acceptable because of that, the AI can say, yes, but in the Talmud, in here and there, it says that blah, 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 and it is acceptable. So we'll see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah, make a movie called Alpha Rabbi. I want to see it. The next question, what do you think are the most pernicious examples of, excellent use of the word pernicious, by the way, pernicious examples of witchcraft-like thinking in the modern world?
You know, definitely you look at conspiracy theories like QAnon, it's exactly the same thing. It's really remarkable when you think about, the Salem witch hunts in American history. This is one of the founding events of American history, is the Salem witch hunts, which are often credited with helping to prevent United States from becoming a theocracy because of the horror of what happened in the Salem witch hunts. And more than 300 years after the Salem witch hunts, we now have millions of Americans, including people in position of power, which basically believe the same thing. That there is a satanic conspiracy, a global conspiracy led by Satan, people who molest children and do all these terrible things in order to destroy humanity, in order to destroy society. So it's still there, and a lot of kind of tropes, a lot of kind of ideas about witches, you see them now being said about women, especially women. They were about Hillary Clinton before, now about Kamala Harris. It's, again, stories don't go away. Powerful stories that have been around for centuries, they don't go away. They're always there, lurking on the sides. Even if they were kind of pushed away, they can come back at any moment.
I found that fascinating, the witchcraft thing as well. I remember my friend Alan Moore talking about what a spell was, and he said it is literally spelling. It's the words that you place. So you go on social media and you create a rumor about someone or QAnon or whatever, and you have taken a sentence of words and you have cursed someone.
And continuing a little bit about QAnon, the interesting thing about it, it was originally created, inspired, the movement got going with anonymous texts online by somebody who identified as Q, which is why it's called QAnon. And this was, I think, 2016, 17. At that time, there was no technology to create such texts except by a human intelligence. Bots and algorithms could disseminate the text, could recommend the text, but not create it. Now, with the new generation of generative AIs, like GPT-4, it is possible to create texts of such a level of sophistication by a non-human intelligence. So technically, the next sect to appear online based on these online messages could actually be created by a non-human intelligence. And, which is remarkable because throughout history you had all these religions claiming that they were created by a non-human intelligence, but this was never true. Now it can actually literally be true that there could be a religion on earth with millions of followers whose holy text was written not by a human being.
So that also answers the previous question about God again as well, which is... now another nice easy one there for you. Do you believe in free will or determinism?
It's not the only choice. I'm non-binary on that question. And with regard to free will, I would say it's a very problematic idea, especially in the age of AI. Belief or naive belief in free will, why did I choose to do this, to vote for that person, to buy that product? Because this is my free will. It's dangerous because it makes us lose curiosity about how we actually make decisions, about the influences about our decisions, and the easiest people to manipulate are the people who believe in free will. That they believe that all their decisions simply, if you believe that my decision is the result of this kind of mystical free will, there is nothing to investigate. Investigation of myself, getting to know myself, relies on assuming that there is more than free will. There are cultural influences. There are political manipulations. There are biological influences, there are biochemical influences. But I decided to do this, to buy that, to vote for that person because of some genetic factor, because of some influence campaign. And for me, the key thing is be more curious about yourself, about your decision-making process, about what is really happening in your mind. If you embark on this journey, on this quest of getting to know myself better, getting to know my mind better, and after years of meditating and exploring and using scientific methods and going to therapy and whatever, and understanding that yes, there are cultural influences, and yes, there are biological influences, and yet I have identified something that cannot be explained by any of those, then okay, call it free will. But don't start with this assumption. It's especially in today's world, when it's becoming easier and easier to hack people and to manipulate people, it's a dangerous assumption that we are just making all our decisions out of free will. And we should remember that freedom is not something that you just have. Freedom is something you have to struggle for. Even the inner freedom of making our minds about different things.
Seems to me, very important what you were. I think every day we should have a moment where we ask ourselves why we believe what we believe. There'll be stories that come up and you have to think, hang on a minute, why do I believe that? Because quite often we find that, again, in arguments on social media, when someone says, but why are you saying that? And they'll say, well, do your own research. And no one would say that if they actually had the evidence. Just say, go and read this and trust it. But so that I think that's a very important part.
Maybe I'll add to that I practice meditation, and this is basically the practice of getting to know your own mind. And where do all these thoughts and decisions and opinions come from? Just sit there with closed eyes and you just observe what is happening inside you, and suddenly a thought pops up, an opinion pops up. And where did this come from? I didn't decide in advance, I want to think this thought, and then it appeared. No. And this is really fascinating. And this is the kind of journey of self-exploration. And one of the important things you realize as you do that, or at least I realized as I did it, is that the mind is just full of junk that we accumulated over the years. Like it's just full of junk. There is so much, again, hatred and fear and greed and malice that we have accumulated over the years. And we have to be very careful about it. Like we are now here sitting and sharing our minds with hundreds of people. And this is a big responsibility. And if you think about politicians who talk in front of audiences of millions, so, the words, thoughts, that something popped up in your mind, and you thought, I'll share it with everybody. And you're basically planting seeds in millions of minds. And you have to be very, very careful about, maybe it's junk. Maybe it's just garbage. And, there are a lot of politicians these days that they really love walls and border guards. And I think that all people, but especially people who are leaders, they need a wall between the mind and the mouth, and a very strong border guard on that wall. And whenever these kind of junk thoughts try to sneak over the border, stop those immigrants, don't let them in.
What is your ideal parallel job if you weren't an author?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it, yeah.
next time you meditate, and then come back here and tell everyone.
That's
but I think that's that bit where you were just talking about the junk as well. I think that's an important thing for us to understand. I remember talking to a neuroscientist who said sometimes you have a thought and you think, oh my God, I didn't know I had that kind of thought inside me, and it can really shock you. And he said sometimes you have to realise it's just the noise of the machinery. And I thought that's such a useful thing, that not every thought that we have has to define us. You go, yeah, that was just the noise of the machinery.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've got 3 minutes left. So, another easy one for you. We've been talking about this. How do we control AI? Now, we've kind of been talking about this quite a lot, but in terms of for people, again, this thing that what can we do? What is the relationship that we can have? Because obviously, we are, whether we want to or not, artificial intelligence is playing a part in our lives. So what are the best ways that we can try and control the way it develops?
Again, before you kind of rush to adopt, I support this regulation or that regulation, the key things are understanding and cooperating. We first of all need to understand what we are facing. And, very complex to understand AI because it has enormous positive potential and also enormous negative potential, and we need to understand both. And secondly, it's not something you can do as an individual by yourself. It's only by very large-scale cooperation. Again, that's why I keep returning to the theme of institutions, because the only way to build a benign society, whether in the age of AI or in any previous age, was relying on institutions. If you try to rely only on yourself, you can't. And if you try to rely just on some individual genius, that person will solve everything, or this person is the messiah, it never works. We need, again, it's the kind of boring stuff of building and maintaining these large, complex institutions, and most importantly, institutions that can identify and correct their own mistakes. The AI revolution will develop very, very rapidly. Nobody can anticipate it in advance. So whatever your thoughts are about how to deal with it, assume that you also make errors or that there are lacunas, you don't see these areas. And this is why you need to cooperate with other people and to have these strong mechanisms to identify and correct mistakes.
It seems like with a lot of the work and the interviews I read, that ultimately underneath it all, one of the things that we must always remember is be curious, be interested, and be ready to change if the evidence that we see before us tells us, well, what I have believed, yeah, that was what I believed when I had that information, but I found new information which seems valid. But the curiosity seems to be the thing that you thrive on.
It's not just being curious, it's really being able to change. And to change our minds more than anything else. That, AI is going to develop extremely rapidly, and our minds need the flexibility to keep up with it. And I think we can do it. I mean, I'm not I won't tell you that we have an insurance from somebody that it will succeed, but we have a chance, we have a good chance. If for every dollar and every pound and every minute that we invest in developing artificial intelligence, we invest another dollar and pound and minute in developing our own minds, we will be okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You're all going to love the book that you're taking away with you. It will change many of your ideas and help them develop as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Yuval. Thank you. There we go, Karen.
Thank you.
Hello, Yuval. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
This is
good to be here.
Real pleasure to be here with Yuval. He is not only a great historian, as you all know, he is a very kind man. In the green room, among his many duties, signing books, answering my questions about Israeli politics, he also helped read a bedtime story to my 10-year-old, who is a huge fan of Unstoppable Us. So thank you, Yuval.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so what I want to do in this book is I want to go through some of the history, some of the stories you tell. I'm going to ask you a few questions about characters you introduce, the ideas they represent. We'll go through some of the arguments you make about history, about AI, and about democracy. And then I hope there'll be some time at the end to go through some of your apocalyptic thought experiments. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I have a whole series of questions, several thousand that people have sent in. I appreciate that. We'll get to those as well. First question. What is that bird?
Oh, that's a difficult question. It's a pigeon.
I mean, thank you. Oh, geez. What does the bird represent, and why is it on the cover of your book about the history of the world?
Well, for two main reasons. First of all, in Hebrew, there is no difference between a pigeon and a dove. I know that in English, in the English-speaking world, pigeons are often called rats with wings, whereas doves are thought of as these white angels of peace. But in Hebrew, they are the same. And there are no doves in the Middle East. Maybe this is why there is no peace in the Middle East. And there are only pigeons. And in the Bible, in the story of Noah and the flood, so he sends a pigeon, not a dove, to see if the flood is over. So we are now living in the midst of a flood of information. And this is kind of my pigeon being sent to see if the flood is over. And the other reason is that one of the chief characters of the book is a pigeon called Cherami, which was 100 years ago was basically the most famous bird in the world. And I think he is still on display in the Smithsonian, not far from here. And
tell the story of Cherami, because it's actually, I think, quite important to the arguments you make in the book.
Yeah, so how did this bird become the most famous bird in the world? So during the First World War, when the American Expeditionary Force fought in northern France against the Germans, so an American battalion was caught behind German lines, surrounded by the Germans, and American artillery, which tried to provide them with cover fire, didn't know their exact location and actually dropped the artillery barrage right on the American soldiers, adding to the problems. And they tried to send runners to division headquarters to inform the commanders where the battalion actually is, but none of them could get through the German lines, so they turned to the only thing that could, which was a carrier pigeon, Cherami. And the commander wrote this tiny note on a piece of paper and attached it to the leg of the pigeon, and they released it to the air, and the pigeon flew through the German fire. It was hit several times. It lost the other leg, luckily not the leg with the note. It was shot through the breast, but it nevertheless managed to get through. And the artillery barrage was lifted, and help was sent to the right place, and the battalion, which was known as the Lost Battalion, was saved. And the pigeon, which was called Cherami, was then hailed as the bird that saved hundreds of American soldiers from death or captivity at the hands of the Germans. At least this was the story, which was repeated again and again in army communiques, in the newspapers. There are movies, there are children's books. So if you want to read a story, there is still a children's book about Cherami, the brave pigeon. A recent historical research that delved into the archives raised a lot of question marks about this whole story. First of all, it now turns out that the headquarters learned about the right location of the battalion before the pigeon arrived. And then it turned out that nobody is sure that the pigeon was actually Cherami. That it could have been a completely different pigeon. But still, the Cherami was displayed in the Smithsonian for years and became a pilgrimage site for veterans of the First World War, and was the most famous bird in the world. And this is part of what the book is about. about the power of information on the one hand, and about the tension between the truth and the stories we tell, and the effectiveness of stories which are not necessarily always truthful.
And that's why it caught my attention, because, as you may have heard in America, we still have some of these issues, and in fact, often with animals. And so I'm going to read a quote that one of our modern philosophers dealing with the same issue, J.D. Vance, said yesterday. If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. You are in favor of that, correct?
I'm not saying I'm in favor. I'm saying that this is what is happening throughout human history.
Yeah.
That, again, most information is not the truth. The truth is a rare and costly subset of information. If you want to write a true story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money, whereas fiction or fantasy, they are very cheap. You just write the first thing that comes to your mind. The truth also tends to be complicated, because reality is complicated, whereas fiction, you can make it as simple as you like it to be, and people usually prefer simple stories. And the last disadvantage of the truth is that the truth is often painful, whether on the individual level, or if you talk about, say, Israeli politics, on the national level. There are many things people don't want to know about themselves, about their nation, about the world. And fiction can be made as flattering as you would like it to be. So in a competition between something which is cheap and simple and flattering, and something which is costly and complicated and sometimes painful, it's obvious who is going to win unless you give the truth some help.
This is the exact argument I made to my board yesterday while I'm trying to raise money for our fact-checking department. But let me ask you then about the question of a noble lie, because it's clear that history is determined by the people who tell the stories, which have either truth in them or they don't have truth in them. And you are not as dismissive of the idea of a noble lie as I expected you would be when I began the book. Explain in what circumstances it is okay for someone who is telling a story to not tell it exactly truthfully for the greater good of some kind.
It is impossible for a story to be an exact replica of reality. You know, there is a famous Borges story about an empire that wants to create a totally truthful map, which will be exactly an exact representation of reality. And they end up producing a map with a scale of 1:1. Because this is the only map which will be 100% truthful and accurate and will not simplify anything, will not change anything. It will have to be a 1:1 map. And so the empire was covered by a map of the empire. And the effort of creating this empire, this map, exhausted the resources of the empire that therefore collapsed. And we are now in a similar situation to some extent. There is a crisis of representation in the world. That no representation seems good enough for us. Because no representation can actually be a 1:1 map of the world. This is simply impossible. And we are not sure what to do about it. Now, my position is that every story to some extent is fictional. Every story, you can't tell the whole truth. This is simply impossible. And there are cases that, yes, you need to simplify. As somebody who wrote, the history of the world in 500 pages, I know that sometimes you have to simplify. And fiction in itself is not necessarily bad. The rules of football or baseball, they are fictional. We invented them. It doesn't mean that they are bad. Fictional literature is not all bad. The key is that fiction should acknowledge its fictionality and not pretend to be reality. And when you think about the cultural or political implications of that, if you want to unite a large number of people, you need to use some stories, some mythologies. And this is not necessarily bad as long as you acknowledge what you're doing. So if we compare, for instance, two foundational texts of human history, if you compare the Ten Commandments and the US Constitution, so one text acknowledges its fictionality and the other doesn't. The Ten Commandments doesn't acknowledge that it emerged from human imagination. It claims to be the product of divine intelligence, to come down from heaven. And the downside of that is that it has no mechanism to admit and correct its own mistakes. And for instance, the Ten Commandments, as they were written sometime in the first millennium BCE, they endorse slavery. Many people don't think about it or don't notice it, but the 10th commandment actually endorses slavery. It says it's okay to hold slaves because the 10th commandment says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or ox or slaves, which implies that God has no problem with people holding slaves. God has a problem only if you covet the slaves of your neighbor. No, that's not okay. That will make God angry. And compare that to the US Constitution, which also, like the Ten Commandments, have served as the basis for large-scale human cooperation, for legal systems, for political systems. Whereas the Ten Commandments start with, I am your Lord God, the US Constitution starts with, we the people. We the people invented this document. We invented these laws. And therefore, because it acknowledges that it emerges from the human imagination, it's humans who wrote this document, it also acknowledges the potential that there might be mistakes in the document, and it has a mechanism to amend itself, which was eventually used to amend the US Constitution, which again initially endorsed slavery and was eventually amended to forbid, to ban slavery. Whereas with the Ten Commandments, because they claim to be just, they came down from heaven, there is no mechanism to change the text. There is no 11th commandment which tells people, well, if you don't like something in the 10th commandment, if you have a 2/3 majority, you can change the text. No, there is no mechanism.
I would think it might be possible for Pope Francis to change the Second Commandment better than the U.S. Congress could change the Second Amendment, but that's where we are. All right, let's stick with religion. I want you to tell the story that I think comes up in at least 3 very consequential parts of the book is the story of the Council of Hippo in Carthage and the consequences of selecting 1 Timothy into the New Testament instead of the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Will you explain that story? I think it's a very important follow-on to what you were just saying about the power of story, and I swear to God, we'll get to AI in just a minute, but this is an important premise for that.
I know we can actually start with AI, which is very, very relevant to the Church Council of Carthage, which took place in what is today Tunisia in 397 CE. Because AI, one of the first big things that we saw it do, that shaping human history, is taking the power of recommendation. That if you go on social media, what you see there is the result of recommendations made by social media algorithms. And the power to recommend to people what stories to read or what videos to watch is extremely important. And one of the best examples in history for the power of recommendation is the editorial process that created the Bible in the New Testament. The people who created the New Testament are not the authors of the texts. They are the editors who decided what will be in and what will be out. Because, there was no New Testament, there was no Bible in the time of Jesus or in the time of St. Paul. They never read the Bible, it didn't exist. In the first 4 centuries of Christianity, Christians produced an enormous number and enormous variety of texts. There were stories about Christ, there were prophecies, doomsday prophecies about the apocalypse, there were letters by St. Paul, by other church leaders, there were lots of fake letters. That people wrote things in the name of St. Paul like 200 years after the man was dead. So Christian communities were again flooded by a very large number of texts, and a question arose: what should good Christians read? They needed a recommendation list. The same way that today we are flooded by TV series and we need a recommendation list, what to watch. So in the late 4th century, a committee was set up, a church council, theologians, bishops. They met first in Hippo, in what is today, I think, Algeria, then in Carthage, in what is today Tunisia, and they hammered out a recommendation list, top 27 texts every Christian should read. And this became the New Testament. They didn't write the text. They went over, again, very large numbers of texts that existed at the time and chose what will be in and what will be out. And this shaped Christianity and the views of billions of people on numerous issues until this very day. And to give you just one example out of many, so one very popular text with Christians at the time was the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Paul is Saint Paul, and Thecla was one of the most favorite saints of the time. She was a woman disciple of Paul, and she was a leader of the community. She preached, she performed miracles, she baptized, and she was hailed as an example that women can be leaders in the church. And women can preach, and women can baptize and perform miracles. So this was one popular text with one view of women. Then there was another text, a letter, allegedly from St. Paul to Timothy, which most scholars today think is a much later forgery, was not written by St. Paul in the 1st century, probably forged in his name sometime in the 2nd century. And in this letter, a completely different view of women and their role in the church. It says that women should be obedient, should be silent, should never be leaders. They should fulfill themselves by doing whatever men tell them to do, and by having children and raising children. This is their role in life. And the committee in Carthage decided to exclude the Acts of Paul and Thecla from the top 27, but to include this letter to Timothy, which is still part of the New Testament around the world, as 1 Timothy. And this has shaped the views of billions of Christians about women in the church and also in general for more than 1,500 years. This is the power of recommendation. And now this power, and this connects to AI, this is the power which is increasingly held by AI algorithms. We have now this kind of huge public debate about social media and the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories and so forth on social media. And you hear people like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg saying that we don't want to censor anybody, that this is an issue of freedom of speech. But it's not. The problem with the spread of this type of information on social media is not human users producing certain lies or fictions or fake news. The real problem is corporate algorithms deciding which stories to recommend, which stories to promote. And the power that was held by the bishops in the Council of Carthage and the power that was held by newspaper editors in recent generations, this is now the power in the hands of the social media algorithms. And this should be at the center of the debate, which we'll get to. on regulation, it's not about the freedom of speech of humans. It's about the responsibility of the corporate algorithms. Because if a corporate algorithm decides to promote a certain conspiracy, this is not on the person who invented it. This is the decision of the algorithm and the decision of its human corporate masters, and this is what should be at the center of the debate.
So what I'm hearing is if the Council of Carthage had been slightly different, women would have been empowered much sooner. We would have had a feminist revolution several centuries earlier. Probably AI would have been invented, and we all would be obliterated by now. Is that correct, Yuval?
That's one possibility. I mean, you can never, I mean, history is extremely surprising.
Yeah, no, I know.
You can never predict the outcome.
You can't unspool one thread from the tapestry. Let's go to some of the concerns you have about AI. I want to go through some of the concerns very quickly, and then I want to go through your philosophy of how these algorithms should be structured. But very briefly, in just a word or two, explain why modern AI might destroy democracy.
Ooh. Very briefly. Well, very briefly, democracy is a conversation. Now, dictatorship is one person dictating everything. That's dictatorship. Democracy is when a group of people have a conversation in order to decide what to do about any major question. Now, to have a conversation is not an easy thing. And there are technical difficulties. If you have 20 people trying to have a conversation, so they can all gather in a room and talk with each other. But how can 20 million people have a conversation? You need some kind of technology in order to do that. Now, until the modern age, there was just no technology to facilitate large-scale conversations, which is why there were no large-scale democracies anywhere in the world. The only examples we have of ancient democracies, they are all small-scale. They are city-states like Athens or Republican Rome, just one city, or they are even smaller, tribes and bands and villages. We have many examples of these small-scale democracies, not a single example of a large-scale democracy in the ancient world. All large-scale polities are authoritarian. We begin to see large-scale democracies only after the rise of modern information technology. The first crucial technology is the newspaper, and then we have the telegraph, and the radio, and the television, and suddenly it becomes feasible. There are other conditions that have to be met. It doesn't guarantee democracy, just that you have a newspaper. You have newspapers and radio also in the Soviet Union. But it becomes possible for the first time in history to have large-scale democracies. And it's important to understand that because it means that information technology is not a side dish, that you have democracy and on the side you have all these issues with information technology. No, information technology is the basis of democracy. Democracy is built on top of this technology. So any major change in information technology is likely to cause an earthquake in democracy, which is built on top of it. And this is what we are now seeing all over the world. What we are seeing all over the world is the collapse of the democratic conversation. We have the most sophisticated information technology in human history, and people are losing the ability to talk with each other, and even more so, to listen to each other. And in every country where this is happening, there are these unique explanations of what is happening in our country. Why can't Democrats and Republicans in the US have a conversation anymore? And you go to Israel, to my country, you hear the unique explanation of what is wrong with Israel. And then you go to Brazil, and then you have the unique explanations of what's wrong with Brazilian society. But you see, the same thing is happening everywhere. The conversation is collapsing, And this is not because of some special feature in the history or society or economy of the country. It's a universal earthquake which results from the rise of this new information technology that originally the developers of the technology promised to us that it will spread the truth and bring tyrannies down and strengthen democracies, but it is doing the opposite. And very briefly, one way to visualize what is happening is imagine that democracy is a group of humans standing and having a conversation, and suddenly a group of robots enter the circle and start talking very loudly, very persuasively, very emotionally, and we can't tell who is a human and who is a robot. This is what has been happening over the last 10, 15 years, and the result is that the conversation is breaking down. And again, this is not a uniquely American phenomenon. It is happening all over the world, leading more and more to the rise of dictatorships, because dictatorships don't need conversations. Again, there is one person dictating everything.
Well, let's push on that assumption for a second. So I could have a different metaphor, which is not a bunch of robots enter the conversation, but a bunch of infinitely intelligent aides join me, and they help me sort through the conversation, and they help me prepare for what I'm going to ask. And then not only that, if you look at the last year, obviously Venezuela, tragic example, but we had, elections are not the same as democracy, but we'll use them as a proxy for this hypothetical. We had reasonably positive elections, if you're in favor of democracy, in Poland. We had a little bit of progress in Turkey, serious progress in India, in fact, where an illiberal democracy has actually been challenged. We had an extremely smooth election leading to the election of a Jewish woman in Mexico. We had extremely swift and effective, no deepfakes, maybe don't like the outcome of the election in France. Similar election in the United Kingdom. I mean, the world's doing all right on these elections despite the challenges of social media, AI, everything else.
And it's not that it's already a done deal. It's not that democracy has collapsed. But if you look at the health of democracies today compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, at least the momentum is very worrying. And again, it's not, I don't think, what really surprises me when I look at the examples from around the world is that it's not about some huge ideological gaps. Actually, the ideological gaps between the different camps today in a place like the US are much smaller than 50 years ago. What worries is the kind of temperature of the argument, and again, this inability to have a reasoned debate, to have a reasoned conversation. Simply having elections is important, but it is not enough. Elections are not democracy. And even in some of the examples you mentioned, so it's not about who wins, which 51% win in the end. It's about the relation between the 51% and the 49%. And democracy shouldn't feel like every election is a life and death struggle, that if we lose this, it might collapse. And even more so, it shouldn't feel like a war between enemies. If a country reaches a situation when people view their political rivals as enemies, then democracy cannot survive for long, because then every election, again, it's like a war. You do anything to win. If you lose, you have no incentive to accept the verdict. If you win, you only take care of your tribe. What is happening in this situation, that a nation breaks down into tribes, leading eventually either to tribal warfare and civil war or to dictatorship. I think that the key thing here also has to do not just with democracy, but also with nationalism and with the breakdown of national communities. That many people think that democracy and nationalism, or democracy and patriotism, are somehow opposites, but they go together, they must go together. Democracy functions well only when there is a national community, only when you feel that you really care about the other people in your country and that they really care about you. If a nation reaches a point when there is no longer a nation, there are warring tribes, and each tribe cares only about itself, then it's only a question of time before democracy collapses. And this is really the worrying trend that we see in many places around the world, irrespective of the results of the latest elections here or there. And this, again, it goes back to the type of communication between people. Can we, for instance, listen to people with different views from our own without thinking that they are enemies?
I learned in the green room that one of the ways that Yuval avoids arguing with bots on Twitter is that he, as he says, is he's stuck in the 90s and uses email and the telephone. Let me ask you a question then. All right, so we're headed into this age. I will certainly agree that democracy is at risk, and I will certainly agree it is at risk for the reasons you give, and I will certainly agree that we will soon have extremely powerful AI algorithms that will underlie a lot of the decisions we make and a lot of the thinking that goes on in our own heads. In a very important section in the book, you lay out 4 values that you think should be embedded in AI systems. And they are benevolence, right? AI systems should be benevolent, seems reasonable. Decentralized, mutuality, you should understand about it, what it understands about you, and the ability to evolve, much as you said about the US Constitution versus the 10 Commandments. So a question for you, what happens when some of these come into conflict with each other, right? So when I read that section, I thought, well, benevolence kind of is in tension with decentralization, because if you decentralize these algorithms, then suddenly you have all kinds of algorithms, you have all kinds of options, you have all kinds of different companies, some of which will be benevolent as you define it, some will not be benevolent as you define it. Well, how is one supposed to weigh these 4 principles for designing future AI systems? Because weighing them correctly seems pretty important to getting the world you want.
Yeah, with benevolence, I mean something very, very narrow, and something we've known for centuries. Simply that if you get hold of my information, you should use it for my benefit and not in order to manipulate me, which is a basic principle that we already have with our doctors and our lawyers and our accountants and our therapists, and it should be no different with the people who provide us with digital services like social media or like email. Like my personal physician...
But pause for a second. Facebook would not have said it's manipulating us even when in the sort of the heyday of its algorithm. It would have said it's giving us what we want.
That's one way of putting it. And the Facebook algorithm has enormous power over us. And Facebook's business model, and the business model of most of these social media companies, it is based on increasing user engagement. And engagement sounds like a nice thing, but who doesn't want to be engaged? But for them, for the companies, it means that we need to spend more time on the platform, because the more time I spend on it, the more money they make, either by showing me advertisements and commercials or by collecting my data and then giving it or selling it to third parties. And whether this is what I want or not, that's a very big question. Do I really want to spend more and more time on the platform? Now, what their algorithms do is, by trial and error, they find my weaknesses. And they use my weaknesses to keep me glued to the screen for longer. This is the basic idea of hacking. How do you hack a smartphone or a computer or a program? You look for the weaknesses in the code. It's the same with human beings. This is how you hack human beings. You use these algorithms to find the weaknesses in our code. Each person with their own weaknesses. It's not one size fits all. What makes me angry? What do I already hate? What do I already fear? Or what I'm greedy for? And they give me more and more and more of that. It's like, the food companies that learn that if you pump something full of sugar and fat and salt, people would want more of it. Now, is it really good for us or not? Again, there is a question here. It's not an easy thing to solve, but this is the key of the dilemma, the key of the discussion. And again, the main message is that ultimately it should not be about the profits of the corporation, but whether consuming all this information is really good for me or not. And one last point, I think like in the example of food, we've reached a point when I think most people need an information diet. That this simplistic idea that more information is always good for us is simply wrong, the same way that more food is not always good for us.
Well, that's why everybody should subscribe to The Atlantic. Let me give you a thought experiment. Because part of what I think is going to, for your system to come down and to work, it's going to depend a little bit on who defines benevolence and who defines these values. And so I want to give you a thought experiment from a conversation I had at a bar not long ago. So I met somebody. I'm going to change some of the details because I can't reveal who they are and what exactly they do. But it was an engineer who works in AI, and they make algorithms. And their current job is that they work for the state of Texas, and they're in charge of the sentencing algorithm. And so they're in charge of an AI algorithm that will determine how long somebody who's guilty will be sent to prison. And so they have hard tasks, right? They have to make sure any algorithm that is trained on historical data will have the biases of that historical data. So you train a sentencing algorithm on historic Texas data, it will be racist, so you have to control for that. You may let the women out sooner, you have to make sure that's proper and right. And you go back through and you control through it and you try to fix that. And so we're having a long conversation and I'm asking her, well, how do you control for this and how do you control for that and how do you control for this? And eventually she says, you know what I do, Nick? She said, I've rigged the algorithm. And I've rigged it in such a way that everybody will be sentenced for much less time than the state of Texas did before. And I've done it in such a way the state of Texas will never figure out that I've done that. Is that something that an AI engineer should be doing?
That's extremely dangerous.
Extremely dangerous, but it may be a value that many liberals agree with, and they feel like conservative states have sentenced people for too long. So it's embedding a value that that person feels is benevolent into a system and leading to what they believe is justice.
At the very least, when we are talking about, the law of a country, this should be left to the citizens and to the voters,
well, it has
and not to the, a dictatorship of an engineer.
Well, they've given the power to hire whatever contractor they want to the state. They've elected, the governor of the state of Texas, and they've hired this person. The state is not Texas where this is happening, so don't Google sentencing algorithm. It's a different thing in a different place. You won't be able to figure it out, but it's the same example.
I think that the key point that is raised by this example is the issue of unfathomability. To what extent we can still understand the systems that control our lives.
Yeah.
When I get this question a lot of what really frightens me about AI. And you have these kind of Hollywood science fiction scenarios of the big robot rebellion, and the robots are rebelling and coming to kill us, and this is unlikely to happen anytime soon. But what is already happening, this is not a science fiction scenario for the future. What is already happening is that we basically have millions of AI bureaucrats, millions of bureaucratic algorithms making more and more decisions about our life. We apply to a bank to get a loan, it's an AI deciding. We committed a crime, they send us to prison, it's increasingly an AI deciding for how long. And this could rise to the level of key economic and financial decisions about what would be the rate of interest of the Federal Reserve. This could increasingly be a decision made by AIs and not human beings. And there are many good reasons why to give this kind of power to AIs. But what happened down the road when eventually so many of these crucial decisions about us are made in a way that we simply cannot understand? We don't know why the bank refused us a loan. We don't know why they sent us to 5 years and not 4 years or 6 years in prison. We don't know why the interest rate is 4% and not 3%. And we don't know, not because somebody's hiding it from us, simply because it's far too complicated for the human brain. that the advantage of AI, the kind of the good side of AI, that it can analyze much more data than any human brain, find patterns that we can't, deal with mathematical complexities which are way beyond what we can deal with. But the downside of all that is, what is the meaning, for instance, of democracy? If increasingly all the decisions, or at least many of the decisions, are made in a way which are not transparent and therefore not accountable to human beings.
Let's go through another one, which is somewhat similar. So one of the companies that makes AI systems is Anthropic. And they use this system called constitutional AI as they choose how they write their prompts and how they structure their algorithm, which is probably the closest of the major AI companies to, as I understand it, the philosophy of Yuval Noah Harari. And so when it gives an answer, it checks whether the answer would abide by the UN Declaration of Human Rights, right? It actually follows like the US Constitution, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and Apple's terms of service. It's very funny. But in any event, the biggest problem that they have and the other AI companies is they don't know. Just as you said, they don't know why things make decisions. And so they've been trying to understand what's called interpretability. And so they went in and they said, well, let's see what happens if we go into all of our training data and we add a little extra weight to everything that has to do with the Golden Gate Bridge. So if there's a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a mention of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a word, if there's a box score about the San Francisco Giants, we'll weigh that a little more than one about the Philadelphia Phillies. They do all that, and then they ask Claude, tell me a love story. And naturally, the love story takes place on the Golden Gate Bridge, right? If you mess with the training data and the weights, you get some of these interesting outcomes. So then the question for you would be, if we can do this, why not go into the AI and not weight it towards the Golden Gate Bridge, but weight it towards love, compassion, benevolence? Is that a good idea?
I'm not sure what it means in a technical sense, but when I look at human history, I know that quite often in history, people talk about love, or they start with love, and very quickly they get to hate and to war. The Christianity, which sees itself, and going back to the Council of Carthage, sees itself as the religion of love, that it's all about love, was responsible for more violence than any other religion or ideology in history. And they somehow found a way how, out of love, we wage crusades, and we build inquisitions, and we burn heretics at the stake. It's all out of love. And they really believed it.
They also gave us Bach.
But again, the way that I think this often happens is that if you think that you are motivated by love, and if you think that you're trying to build utopia, whoever stands in your way must be demonic. Whoever stands in your way must be evil. The more good I am, then any opposition is, by definition, it's not just somebody who thinks differently, but they are evil. Now, again, I'm not sure how to translate that into AI speak, but again, one of the lessons from history is that just thinking that because we have these kind of good weights, we've weighted our holy book, we've weighted the code in favor of love. Anything that has love, it got extra. Anything that has compassion, it got extra. And somehow from that, you get the Inquisition. So if it happens with humans, I would also be very worried about AI. But what we need, the basic thing that, again, we learn again and again in history is that we need a self-correcting mechanism. We can't trust that just because something has these good values at its basis, what will come out of it will also necessarily be benevolent and compassionate. We saw it again in the modern age with Marxism, which begins with these wonderful ideas of equality and of compassion, and ends with the gulags. And if you're really convinced that you're coming from a good foundation, and also if you think that you're in the process of building utopia, then it gives you an open check to do the most horrible things on the way to utopia. And then anything that stands in your way is then transformed from political rivalry to kind of demonic possession.
I mean, in some ways, this is one of the scariest things you said, because the people who are building the AI models genuinely do believe they are leading us to utopia, right?
And that's very, very dangerous, because this is what gives them the open check. They say, we are building utopia, so anything that kind of we have to sacrifice on the way is worth it, because when you would look at the bottom line, again, this was the basic argument also of people like Lenin and Stalin. Yes, we have to murder these millions of people, but in the end, when we build utopia, real existing socialism here on Earth, it will turn out that it's, these billions who died in the Gulag, this was worth it.
Man, I had never thought of the Khmer Rouge at the same time I thought of Anthropic, but here we are. but hold on, Yuval. In the next couple weeks, I think, where were you last? You were last in Toronto. You're probably going to move west, and you're probably going to sit down, and you're going to sit down with all these people because they all read your books, right? There's this famous image of Jeff Bezos, and he's giving this interview, and he's got like 4 books behind him on his bookshelf, and like plants, and and 3 of them are Yuval's, I believe. So you're going to be talking to these folks, and so what you're telling me is that if, say, Dario Modi, the guy who runs Anthropic, is there, he's like, we're trying to figure out what to train on, and I've been thinking we should train it on, we should just train it on sort of positive, uplifting, factual stories. I really don't think we should, train it on everything, which includes like serial killers' diaries. And you're going to say like, no, put the serial killers' diaries in there because, don't just train it on your definition of love. Is that what you're going to argue to him?
No, I mean, I would basically say that I don't know how to train AIs. This is not my field. But no matter what kind of positive basis you give it, and no matter what positive intentions you have, your number one assumption should be that this thing is not infallible. I'm not infallible. There is a high chance for mistakes, and therefore I need to leave room for correction. The most important thing when you build it is build a mechanism for identifying and correcting the mistakes. Again, this is also the advice that I would have gave Lenin in 1917. Like, you're going on this huge experiment, you're thinking that you're building utopia, start with the assumption that you will make mistakes, include in the structure, say, of the Soviet Union, mechanisms for identifying and correcting the mistakes of the system, including the mistakes of Lenin and of whoever is going to succeed you, which is the one thing they didn't do.
Yeah, Lenin should have read *Sapiens*. I have a nice image of him reading it on the train there. All right, let's talk a little bit about cocoons, which is one of the extremely interesting parts of your book. So you make an argument, and you say that there are some fundamental human issues, like the separation of mind and body. You tell the story of Martin Luther. It's actually a way of telling the story of Martin Luther I had not read before. But you argue that what could happen in an age of AI is that you end up with some civilizations that have a totally different understanding of what is the mind and what is the body, and therefore totally different judicial systems. So it's one of the most mind-bending parts of the book. I'd like you to explain this to the audience.
Ooh. So there is a lot of explaining. I'll try to do it short. I mean, first of all, about the cocoons, it's the changing of the metaphors in this age of information revolution. That 30 years ago, the dominant metaphor was the web, the World Wide Web, and the web was supposed to connect everything and everybody. And over the years, the web kind of closed in on us, and now it's the cocoons. That every person or every group is enclosed within an information cocoon, and sometimes, your next door neighbors are in a different cocoon than you, and there is just no way to access from one to the other. And an extreme example of where this can go, like today, people don't agree, like in the United States, about who won the last elections. This can go to a place where people don't agree what a human is, or what a person is, and what are the relations between mind and body. One of the recurrent arguments throughout history that we see in many traditions, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, is what exactly is a human being and what is the relation between mind and body, or between soul and spirit and body. So if we again go back to the age of the Council of Carthage and early Christianity, so Judaism and the first Christians, which came out of Judaism, they viewed humans as embodied entities. The body was central. We are bodies. The soul, biblical Judaism did not talk at all about the soul. The idea that there could be a soul that exists separately from the body, unheard of in biblical Judaism. It's all about the body. And also the first Christians, they focus on the body. The whole idea originally is that God is incarnated in the flesh. The flesh is at the center. And after Jesus is crucified, he's supposed to come back in the flesh. And the kingdom of God is supposed to be a material kingdom of fleshy bodies on the earth. But eventually, under influences of Platonic philosophies and other influences, and also for practical purposes, because the kingdom of God was nowhere to be seen, and the really big problem for early Christians is that they won. You know, when you're a persecuted minority, a sect, you can have all these promises, okay, when we finally gain power, then we'll have the kingdom of God. And then they have one of the biggest disasters that can happen to any religion, they gain power. They become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, so where's the kingdom of God? And there is no kingdom of God. You still have the same wars and corruptions and civil wars and executions and human greed, and it's all the same. So they say, okay, the kingdom of God is not on earth. It's on a different level of reality. It's in heaven. And you can't access it in the flesh. After you die, your soul will get to heaven. And many Christians drift towards a very different view of humans, as a dualistic view actually, that my real essence is my soul, which is entrapped in a material, biological, filthy body with all these sexual passions and all these lusts. And the hope, the ideal, is that eventually the soul will be released from this earthly, fleshy prison and get to a purely immaterial realm, which is heaven, where it will exist forever and ever. And throughout the 2,000 years of Christian history, you see this tension. They can never really abandon the body, partly because the Bible is full of it. And again, Christ was incarnated in the body, in the flesh, and rose and came back to life in the flesh. And there is very little about this immaterial realm of pure souls in the Bible itself. It all mostly came later. So there is this constant arguments that often leads to blows and to wars of religion. And in the early century of the church, one of the biggest arguments was about the nature of Jesus Christ himself, with one camp saying that he was entirely a human, made of flesh, another camp saying that he was entirely divine and non-material, a spiritual being, and there was a third camp who said that he was non-binary. And the non-binaries won. This was the eventually official doctrine of the church. He's non-binary. He's both and none at the same time. But huge arguments and also violence around these issues. Now, how does all this relate to AI? We are going to have another round of this mind-body debate. We are already in the midst of it. What is your identity? What defines your identity? Is your identity defined by your biological body? Or is your identity defined by what you believe about yourself, by your faith? People like Martin Luther, they said sola fide. The only thing that matters is what you believe. And we are now living in a kind of new round of this debate, with some people say if you go online, you can be whatever you want. The biological body sitting in front of the screen should not limit the identities that you can adopt. Other people say, no, there is a biological body. This is the center of your identity. You cannot ignore your biological body. And as everybody knows, this is a very heated debate right now. And this also potentially will influence how we treat AIs. AIs have no bodies, but they will increasingly be able to interact with us and to press our emotional buttons and even to pretend to have emotions of themselves. Now, people who give primacy to the body in the identity of a person will resist treating AIs as persons. People who think that identity has little to do with biology will have a much easier time giving or treating AIs as persons, even though they have no bodies. And different countries can go different ways. So, arguments about human rights today between, say, United States and China, think what it means in 50 years when you perhaps have billions of entities which are considered persons with rights in one country, but another country doesn't recognize them as persons at all because they have no biological body. And at least in the US, interestingly enough, there is already a completely open legal path to recognizing non-humans devoid of bodies as legal persons with rights. Because corporations, according to US law, are legal persons that has, for instance, freedom of speech, according to the Supreme Court since at least 2010. Now, at present, this is a legal fiction, because all the decisions of corporations are made by human beings with biological bodies. So Google, according to US law, is a legal person, but at present, all the decisions of Google have to be made by some human being. But what happens, in a few years maybe, when you start incorporating AIs as legal persons? You can technically incorporate an AI as a corporation, let's call it Google. And the interesting thing about Google is that it doesn't need any human employees to make its decisions for it. This is what the AI can do it by itself. So the AI, for instance, can open a bank account and can start earning money. It can go on TaskRabbit or Mechanical Turk online and offer its services to people or corporations and earn money, and then it has money. And then it can start investing its money in the stock exchange. And if it's a very intelligent AI, it could potentially become the richest person in the US. So think about a situation when the richest person in the US is not a human being. It's an AI. And again, according to US law, as far as I understand, one of the rights reserved for this non-human person is freedom of speech, which manifests itself, among other things, in making political contributions. So this AI could donate billions of dollars to politicians in exchange for giving even more rights to AI. So these are the kinds of science fiction scenarios I think that we should be more concerned with than the Great Robot Rebellion.
If a senior AI bot starts to hit on a junior AI bot in this corporation, what should the AI HR department... Okay. We have a bunch of flesh and blood bodies here who have to go get pizza and beer. So I'm going to ask just one more question about the apocalypse, and then we're going to go to audience questions. So I was reading your book on the subway. I was wrapping it up before dinner the other night with my son, and this was my favorite paragraph. I'm just going to read it to you, and I want you to explain what it means. We have now created a non-conscious, but very powerful alien intelligence. Agreed. If we mishandle it, AI might extinguish not only the human dominion on Earth, but the light of consciousness itself, turning the universe into a realm of utter darkness. Very cheerful book here, Yuval. This is the end. It is our responsibility to prevent this. So one way to prevent it would be to prevent AI from extinguishing us. Another would be to try to create consciousness and send it out into the universe. Explain to me, the question that this paragraph raises is, what is the thing that humans could do that would allow consciousness to exist even if we extinguish ourselves?
Oh, I'm not sure what it is. I mean, the problem is we still don't understand consciousness. We don't know how it emerges in us. We don't know how it evolved. That's why we also, with regard to AI, this big question of AI consciousness, I tend to be agnostic about it. I don't think that AIs will necessarily develop consciousness, but I'm not sure that they will never develop consciousness. That could be. So again, this scenario that AIs destroy human civilization, take over, and maybe spread from Earth to the rest of the galaxy and to other galaxies, but in the process they never develop consciousness. This is the dark universe scenario. That, again, that there is a huge confusion about these two terms because in humans they go together. Intelligence is the ability to attain goals and solve problems on the way to that goal. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Humans solve problems relying on our feelings. In us and in other mammals and animals, consciousness and intelligence go together. This is why we confuse them. Now, in computers, so far, we've only seen an advance, a huge advance in intelligence, without any advance in consciousness as far as we can tell. In some fields, narrow fields, AI is already far more intelligent than us, and still it has no consciousness. When it wins a game of chess, it's not happy. When it loses, it's not sad. It doesn't feel anything. Now, in many scenarios, as AI becomes more and more intelligent, at some point, it also gains consciousness. But there is no reason to think that this is inevitable. There could be different roads leading to super intelligence. Mammals and humans have been traveling along one road for millions and millions of years, a road which involves the development of consciousness. Computers, AIs, might simply be traveling along a different road, a much faster road, which reaches superintelligence without passing through any phase of developing consciousness. And if this happens, and if it gets out of our control, this could spell, again, not just the end of the human dominion on Earth, but the end of the light of consciousness itself. You can have a galactic empire without any feeling, and nothing feels anything. It's just all dark.
But why is that? Explain to me why that is so much a worse outcome than just the obliteration of humans, which is a plenty bad outcome.
There are other entities, conscious entities in the world right now. There are other animals. There is no reason to think that, in the history of billions of years of life, that sapiens is definitely the last station. Whether through biological evolution or whether through some kind of combination with AI, it's very likely that if we survive, I don't think that humans like us will still be here in 1,000 years or 10,000 years. The technology will be so advanced that there will be sentient beings, but they will have completely different bodies and minds, completely different experiences. And this is not necessarily bad. The same way that, the fact that we are here and the first human species that existed 2 million years ago are gone, we don't think about it as a tragedy. And most people, at least with regard to their children, they hope that their children will be, at least in some way, a bit more evolved than them. But to think that this will be completely wiped out, that there will still be intelligence, but no consciousness at all. I mean, I think that intelligence is really overrated. The really important thing in life is consciousness. It's not intelligence. I mean, intelligence enables us to do different things, but ultimately, it's all about consciousness.
You know who's still going to be there, Yuval? These guys. Pigeons are going to be there, and they're going to speak thousands of languages. All right, let's go to some audience questions. In your last book, this is from Martin Gallardo, in Homo Deus, you began your book by arguing that humanity has, quote, has almost defeated, quote, hunger, plagues, and war. Do you still stand for that idea, or have you reconsidered your argument?
I think humanity has the capacity to rein in famine, plague, and war, but it depends whether we actually do it, depends on our decisions, and we have been making some terrible decisions over the last 10 years, which is why we are seeing the return of these calamities, of these conditions. We are now on the verge of a third world war, which, if it happens, is also likely to be accompanied by famine and potentially by plague. And the key thing to understand is that the decline, for instance, of war in recent generations was not the result of a change in the laws of nature. It was not some divine miracle. It was simply humans making good decisions and building good institutions. And if we start making bad decisions and neglecting the institutions that preserved peace, then war returns.
This question is from Hamad Alavi. There is growing concern regarding the impact of AI on employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs and low-income communities. Considering the rapid advancements and uncertainties associated with AI, what strategies or measures can be implemented to alleviate these negative effects?
The safest thing is to slow down. I think that humans and human societies are extremely adaptable, but in order to adapt, you need time. So, you know, if 10% or 20% of people suddenly lose their jobs, this is a huge political crisis. If it's kind of more drawn out over several years, we have time to adapt. And the most important thing is what happens on the global level. Because when I look at the country like the United States, for instance, I'm not so worried. I mean, you know, many jobs will disappear in the coming decade or two. Other jobs will emerge. The big question is whether people will be able to retrain themselves to fill the new jobs. And for that, they will need support. And the countries that lead the AI revolution, they will have immense resources to support the retraining of the population and also to support those members of society that will not be able to go through the transition. The big problem will be in other countries that might face complete economic collapse and will just not have the resources to retrain their workforce and to adapt to the new AI economy.
What do you think of the premise of the question that AI will affect employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs in low-income communities? People argue both sides of that.
I'm not sure. There are good reasons to think it will definitely impact also kind of high-income jobs, accountants, lawyers, doctors, coders, engineers. There is no reason to think that it will focus specifically on low-income jobs.
I think it's probably going to wipe out media CEOs and historians first. This is from Mike Sexton. My favorite thing about your historical writing is that it has implications not just for how we live, but how we should live. If you were a lifestyle guru instead, what message or recommendations would you have for your audience?
I'm not a lifestyle guru, so I don't know.
As most of you know, this man meditates 2 hours a day, takes a month-long retreat. You are a lifestyle guru.
Yeah, but I don't tell all people to do it. I know that, you know, it works for me, but I know it doesn't work for other people. You know, if for somebody else, it's better to, you know, take a hike in the woods, so do that instead. The idea that, you know, meditation works for me, so it must work for all people, it's not.
Yeah, I tried a month-long silent retreat and didn't work for my employees and my 3 kids. How do you think AI and disinformation will impact minority rights, especially for those in the LGBTQ plus community?
Ooh. Again, it depends on our decisions. It's not deterministic. It can work both ways. For my own life, I know that, you know, the internet and social media has been wonderful in many ways to the LGBTQ community. I met my husband 22 years ago in one of the first social media websites for gay people in Israel, which was, again, it was really a revolution. Because if you think about minorities in history, there are 2 types of minorities. You have concentrated minorities and you have dispersed minorities. And concentrated minorities, you think like, you know, Jewish communities. So if you're born a Jew, let's say in Europe in the Middle Ages, then there aren't many Jews around, but you're surrounded by them. You're born into a Jewish family, in a Jewish neighborhood, in a Jewish ghetto, in a Jewish community, you know lots of Jews. So you have no problem finding other Jews. But for instance, I was born in Israel in the 1970s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in a very homophobic society. And I wasn't born in Tel Aviv. I was born in a small suburb of Haifa. And I didn't know anybody who was gay. And this is a dispersed minority. Most gay boys are not born to a gay family in a gay community. Sometimes it happens, but it's very rare. So the first question you encounter is, how do I find the others? And a question that Jews don't have to deal with, but gay people had to deal with throughout history. And then the internet came along. And to a large extent solved the problem. That suddenly it became very easy, or at least much easier than before, to find each other. So, you know, I often criticize, and in the book there is a lot of criticism of information technology and social media, but they also have enormous positive potential.
Could extinguish the light of the universe, but good for the gays. All right. Thank you. If you could resurrect one other species of human that is now extinct, which one would you bring back and for what purpose?
I think it will be very bad for them. I mean, the way that our species treat ourselves, just because we have a little bit of different language or skin color, I wouldn't like to be a Neanderthal minority or Denisova minority in a sapiens world.
Should AI be raised with human parents along a curated, this is from Kathleen Landers, along a curated developmental trajectory to create a sense of love and attachment and connection on the assumption that it's possible to instill a moral code in the way one is created by humans, we should try?
AIs are not organic. I mean, they function along a completely different, in completely different ways. They are not, I don't know, chimpanzees or Neanderthals that you can think, okay, I'll raise a chimpanzee in a human family so it will become human-like. And this is a key kind of misconception we often have about AI. Like you have all these people asking, when will AI reach human-level intelligence? The answer is never. It's not on the path to human-level intelligence. It's not human, it's not even organic. I mean, for me, I mean, you know, the acronym AI traditionally stood for artificial intelligence. I think it should stand for alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense of coming from outer space, alien in the sense that, yes, this is intelligence, but it makes decisions, it processes information, it invents ideas in a fundamentally alien way. Again, it's not organic. One thing, just one very important thing is that organic beings, we work by cycles. Day and night, winter and summer, growth and decay, and sometimes we're active, sometimes we need to rest. One of the problems we encounter more and more in the world is that now the world is increasingly run by these non-organic intelligences that never need to rest, and they don't have cycles, and they pressure us to be the same. Instead of them becoming like us, they pressure us to be the same. And if you force an organic being to be on all the time, to be active all the time, eventually it just collapses and dies. You know, you think even about something like the financial system. So traditionally, the financial system is an organic system which sometimes take breaks. Wall Street the market is open only, I think, Monday to Friday, 9:30 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's it. Weekend, it's off. Christmas, it's off. And this is good for human beings. But if you give AIs greater control of finance, then the system is always on, and this puts pressure on human financiers and bankers to be always on, which is just humanly impossible. And the same thing is happening to journalists, and the same thing is happening to politicians, which consequently collapse. And I often say that the most misunderstood word in the English language, at least in the United States, is the word excited. That people overuse it as a good thing. Like they meet you and they say, oh, I'm so excited to meet you. You publish a book, oh, it is so exciting. And they think that excited means happy, but it doesn't. Excited means that like your nervous system and your brain is fully on. And if you could keep the nervous system of an organic entity on all the time, it leads to collapse. So the whole system is far too excited. We need to relax. Like we meet each other, I'm so relaxed to be here with you today. And not excited at all. And just think how good it would be if politics was less exciting. Like, what we need, I think, above all in politics is boring politicians. Like, I would say, vote for boring politicians.
All right, well, I am so relaxed to ask the very last question of the night, Yuval. This is from Misha. Do you think that future reliance on artificial intelligence will impact and compete with religion as a source of spirituality?
Could be, quite likely. I think that, you know, many religions have always fantasized about having access to a superhuman intelligence. And suddenly we have it. Think about texts, about holy texts. The idea of the holy text is that this is coming from a non-human intelligence which is superior to us. Now, the problem with holy texts throughout human history until today was that they couldn't really talk back to us. Like, there was something in the text we couldn't understand, and the text could not explain itself. Like, what is the correct interpretation of this passage in Scripture? So you always, even though in theory the highest authority in the religion was the holy text, in practice a human institution grew around the holy text, and the real authority was in the hands of the people who interpreted the text. And the same way that you have today this fight in the tech world between people who believe in open source and people who believe that no, it should be closed and just a couple of experts will. This was the same with Catholics and Protestants. Like the Catholics say, no, you have the experts of the church, they should interpret the Holy Code. And you have the Protestants who believe in open source. Anybody can read the code and interpret it by themselves. But what happens when for the first time in history the text can talk back? Whether the text of the traditional holy books, you can train an AI to read every single treatise written by every theologian or bishop or thinker in the 3rd century or in 11th century Byzantium, and that AI will understand the texts of Christianity better than any human being. Would it be more authoritative than human theologians and bishops? One big question. The other question, what happens if you have new religions with texts written by a non-human intelligence? And this can already happening right now. With AIs maybe disseminating a new holy text online, which creates the kernel for the next big religion, which will have, again, a text that can talk back. coming from a superhuman, non-human intelligence. So I definitely think that some of the most interesting developments in AI will be in the field of theology and religion. And maybe it's and with a recommendation that Google and Microsoft, they should hire a few theologians because they will need it.
All right, that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much to Politics and Prose. Thank you so much to the theater. And thank you most of all to Yuval Noah Harari.
The thing is that this is just, extremely primitive AIs. The algorithms, the AIs that manage the social media platforms, they are just the first generation. We haven't seen anything yet. In 10 or 20 years, we will have far more powerful AIs, and we need to start thinking very seriously, how do we manage that? Again, understanding that these are not tools in our hands, these are agents that can make decisions that we can't anticipate, that can invent new ideas from new texts to new financial devices that really go beyond the human imagination.